At a luxurious dinner, the millionaire shows off all his wealth. But the young woman beside him prefers a simple, heartfelt gesture. She trades the expensive dessert for a forgotten book, and that small act awakens unexpected feelings within him. In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers pierce the sky like modern-day castles, Maxwell Reed surveyed his domain from the 87th floor of Reed Tower. At 45, he had everything money could buy. The penthouse with views that made real estate agents salivate, the collection of rare watches that graced the pages of luxury magazines, and a reputation as the most ruthless venture capitalist on the East Coast. "Mr. Reed, your 11 o'clock is here," announced Diane, his executive assistant, through the intercom. Maxwell straightened his custom Brioni suit and adjusted his platinum cufflinks. "Send them in." The glass doors parted, revealing 3 men in expensive suits, each carrying identical leather portfolios. Behind them, almost like an afterthought, walked a woman Maxwell had never seen before. She wasn't dressed like the others, no power suit or obvious displays of wealth. Instead, she wore a simple beige dress with a blue scarf, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun. What caught Maxwell's attention, however, was the way she looked around his office, not with the usual awe or intimidation, but with quiet curiosity. "Maxwell Reed," boomed Richard Hemsworth, CEO of a tech startup desperate for funding. "Thank you for seeing us today. I believe our presentation will exceed your expectations." Maxwell nodded absently, his eyes still on the woman. "And who might you be?" She turned to him with calm, assessing eyes. "Olivia Barnes. I'm not part of the presentation team. I'm here to observe." "Ms. Barnes is our cultural consultant," Hemsworth explained quickly. "She helps ensure our company values align with our business practices." Maxwell couldn't hide his smirk. "Cultural consultant? That's a new one." He gestured to the conference area of his office. "Well, let's not waste time." As the men set up their presentation, Maxwell found himself watching Olivia, while Hemsworth droned on about market penetration and scalability. She examined the art on his walls, all originals by renowned contemporary artists, each worth millions. "Impressive collection," she said during a pause, interrupting the flow of the presentation. "Do you actually like any of them?" The room fell silent. Nobody interrupted Maxwell Reed's meetings. "I beg your pardon?" Maxwell said, more intrigued than offended. "The art," Olivia clarified, gesturing to a particularly abstract canvas that had cost him $8 million. "Do you connect with any of these pieces, or are they just another asset class?" Hemsworth looked mortified. "Ms. Barnes, perhaps we should focus on—" "It's fine," Maxwell cut in, a small smile playing at his lips. "My art collection has appreciated 43% in the last 3 years. That's the connection I value." Olivia nodded, her expression revealing nothing. "I see." The meeting continued, but Maxwell found his attention divided between the ambitious pitch and the enigmatic woman who seemed immune to the intimidation his wealth usually generated. Later that evening, Maxwell sat in his private booth at Luminescence, New York's most exclusive restaurant. The waiting list was 6 months long, but Maxwell Reed never waited for anything. The sommelier hovered nearby, presenting a bottle of Romanée Conti that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. "Will your guest be joining soon, Mr. Reed?" asked Sebastian, the restaurant manager, who personally attended to Maxwell. "She's running late." Maxwell checked his Patek Philippe watch. His date tonight was Vanessa, a model he'd been seeing casually. Nothing serious. Maxwell Reed didn't do serious. Relationships were transactions, just like everything else. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversation of New York's elite. Politicians, celebrities, and business magnates filled the tables, all part of the same exclusive club. Maxwell enjoyed the atmosphere, the knowledge that he belonged to this rarefied world of privilege. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa apologizing that a shoot was running late. He texted back that he'd send his driver for her. As he set his phone down, something unusual caught his eye. Across the restaurant, sitting alone at a small table, was Olivia Barnes. Maxwell frowned. Luminescence wasn't the kind of place where you could simply walk in, especially not alone. Yet there she was, dressed more formally than earlier, but still with that understated elegance that stood out among the flashier patrons. Curiosity got the better of him. Maxwell stood and made his way through the restaurant, nodding at familiar faces as he passed. "Miss Barnes," he said, arriving at her table. "Twice in one day. Are you following me?" She looked up unsurprised. "Mr. Reed, I was wondering if you might appear. This place has a 6-month waiting list. So I've heard." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Would you like to join me while you wait for your companion?" Maxwell should have declined. He had no reason to sit with this woman, who had already shown a disregard for the social cues most people carefully observed around him. And yet he found himself taking the seat. "How did you get a reservation?" he asked directly. "Some doors open with connections rather than credit cards," she replied, taking a sip of water. "No wine," he noticed, "though I imagine you rarely need to distinguish between the two. You speak your mind, Miss Barnes. Now, Olivia, please. And yes, I find it saves time." Sebastian appeared at their table, looking confused. "Mr. Reed, is everything all right with your usual table?" "Everything's fine, Sebastian. I'm joining Miss Barnes briefly. Please bring her whatever she'd like." Olivia ordered a simple dish, declining the chef's special tasting menu that Maxwell suggested. When Sebastian left, Maxwell studied her more carefully. "You're not what I expected from a cultural consultant," he said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd be more impressed by the trappings of success." She smiled slightly. "Is that what these are? Trappings?" Before he could respond, his attention was drawn to a commotion near the entrance. Their family, parents and 2 teenage children, was being politely but firmly turned away by the maitre d'. Not unusual, Luminescence strictly enforced its dress code and reservation policies. What was unusual was Olivia's reaction. She watched the scene with a frown, then stood abruptly. "Excuse me for a moment." Maxwell watched in astonishment as she approached the family, spoke briefly to the maitre d', and then led the family to her table. She returned to Maxwell with an apologetic smile. "I hope you don't mind the company," she said. "They've come all the way from Ohio for their anniversary. 20 years of marriage. They saved for months for this trip. And they didn't think to make a reservation?" Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "They had one. For tomorrow. An honest mistake." Maxwell glanced at the family, now seated awkwardly at Olivia's small table, looking out of place among the wealthy patrons. "That's not how this place works." "Perhaps it should," she said simply. "Would you like to join us? I'm sure they'd appreciate meeting a New York financial legend." The invitation caught him off guard. Maxwell Reed didn't dine with strangers, especially not ordinary tourists from the Midwest. He was about to decline when his phone buzzed again. Vanessa's shoot would run another hour at least. "Fine," he said, more from curiosity than charity. "But we'll need a bigger table." With a word to Sebastian, they were moved to a larger table in a prime location. The family, the Johnsons from Columbus, seemed overwhelmed by the sudden VIP treatment. Mr. Johnson, an accountant at a small firm, kept glancing nervously at the prices on the menu. Maxwell, on an impulse he didn't fully understand, ordered champagne for the table and told Sebastian to bring the chef's recommendations. "Please, it's my treat," he said when Mr. Johnson began to protest. "Consider it a gift for 20 years of marriage. That's quite an achievement." As dinner progressed, Maxwell found himself increasingly fascinated, not by the Johnsons, who were pleasant but utterly ordinary, but by Olivia. She asked them questions about their life in Ohio, their children's aspirations, their anniversary traditions, showing genuine interest in answers that should have been painfully boring to anyone in Maxwell's circle. Yet somehow the conversation wasn't boring. The Johnsons' daughter wanted to become a marine biologist. Their son was developing an app with his friends. Mrs. Johnson taught 3rd grade and had stories about her students that made even Maxwell laugh. It was a glimpse into a world he rarely encountered, one where success wasn't measured in billions or acquisitions. Throughout the meal, Maxwell caught Olivia watching him with that same calm, assessing gaze from earlier. It unsettled him, made him feel as though she was looking past the carefully constructed image he presented to the world. When the Johnsons left, full of effusive thanks and slightly tipsy from the expensive champagne, Maxwell and Olivia were left alone at the table. "That was unexpected," he admitted. "Was it so terrible?" she asked. "No," he said, surprising himself with his honesty. "But I'm curious what game you're playing, Miss Barnes." "Olivia," she reminded him. "And not everything is a game, Mr. Reed." "Maxwell." "Maxwell," she repeated, and he found he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. Sometimes life is simply about connections, not the kind that get you reservations or business deals, but the kind that remind us we're human. Before Maxwell could respond, Sebastian approached with a message. Vanessa had arrived and was waiting at his original table. "Your date has arrived," Olivia noted. "You shouldn't keep her waiting." Maxwell stood, feeling strangely reluctant to end their conversation. "This has been interesting. Life often is when we step outside our usual patterns." She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, placing it on the table. "If you're ever interested in continuing our conversation." Maxwell picked up the card. It was simple, cream-colored with just her name and a phone number. No title, no company. "What exactly do you do, Olivia Barnes?" he asked. She smiled enigmatically. "I help people find what they've lost." With that she stood. "Thank you for dinner, Maxwell. I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again soon." As she walked away, Maxwell pocketed her card, oddly certain that she was right. Their paths would cross again, and something told him that when they did, nothing would be quite the same. A week passed before Maxwell found himself thinking about Olivia Barnes again. He was in the back of his Maybach, scrolling through acquisition reports on his tablet, when they passed a small bookstore in Greenwich Village. Through the window, he glimpsed a familiar figure browsing the shelves. Without thinking, he tapped on the partition. "Pull over, James." The driver obeyed immediately, bringing the luxury sedan to a smooth stop. Maxwell hesitated, his hand on the door handle. What was he doing? He had meetings scheduled, deals to close, yet something about that chance sighting tugged at him. "I'll be a few minutes," he told James, stepping onto the sidewalk. The bell above the door jingled as Maxwell entered Timeless Pages, a cramped but charming independent bookstore that looked like it belonged to another era. The smell of old paper and leather bindings filled the air. Few patrons were inside, and Maxwell spotted Olivia immediately, examining a worn volume in the classics section. "Your cultural consultancy extends to literature?" he asked, approaching her. Olivia looked up, a genuine smile crossing her face. "Maxwell read in a bookstore. Now I've seen everything. I do read, contrary to popular belief. Quarterly reports and term sheets, I imagine." She closed the book she was holding. "But somehow I doubt you came in here for Steinbeck." She was right, of course. Maxwell couldn't remember the last time he'd read fiction. His nightstand held business biographies and economic forecasts, not novels. "I saw you through the window," he admitted. "Thought I'd say hello." "How serendipitous." She gestured around the store. "What do you think of this place?" Maxwell glanced around at the mismatched shelves, the faded carpet, the elderly man behind the counter who hadn't even looked up when one of New York's wealthiest men entered his shop. Seems like a failing business model. Independent bookstores can't compete with online retailers. "That's the financier's perspective," Olivia acknowledged. "But places like this offer something algorithms can't quantify. Community, discovery, the chance to find something you didn't know you were looking for." As if to prove her point, she pulled a book from the shelf and handed it to him. The cover was simple, the spine slightly cracked from previous readings. "The Great Gatsby," Maxwell read. "I was forced to read this in high school." "Did you understand it then?" "Green light, American dream, tragic ending. I got an A on the paper." Olivia laughed softly. "Perhaps it deserves a second reading. Some books reveal different truths at different stages of life." Maxwell turned the book over in his hands. It was nowhere near the quality of the rare first editions in his office library, books chosen by his interior designer that he'd never actually opened. "I have a meeting in 30 minutes, he said, checking his watch. "Then you should get going." Olivia took the book back. The world of high finance awaits. Something in her tone, not judgmental exactly, but knowing, made Maxwell feel as though he was failing some test he hadn't realized he was taking. "Have dinner with me," he said abruptly. Olivia tilted her head, studying him. "Why?" The directness of her question threw him. Women didn't usually ask why Maxwell Reed wanted to have dinner with them. They simply said yes. "Because you intrigue me," he answered honestly. "I'm not available tonight," she replied, "but I'm free tomorrow." "Not at Luminescence, though. I'll choose the place." Before Maxwell could protest, he never relinquished control of such decisions. Olivia was writing an address on a scrap of paper. 7 o'clock. "Dress casually." She handed him the paper, then returned to browsing books as if their conversation had concluded. Maxwell stood there a moment longer, unused to being dismissed. Finally, with a shake of his head, he turned and left the store. Back in his car, he examined the address. It was in Brooklyn, not the gentrified parts where hedge fund managers were buying up brownstones, but a neighborhood Maxwell hadn't visited in years. "Everything all right, sir?" James asked, watching him in the rearview mirror. "Fine," Maxwell replied, pocketing the paper. "Let's get to the next meeting." Throughout the day, Maxwell found his thoughts drifting to Olivia Barnes. Who was she, really? He'd had his security team run a background check after their first meeting. Standard procedure, for anyone who caught his interest or might be useful. The results had been surprisingly sparse. Olivia Barnes, 38, born in Seattle, BA in Literature from Vassar, Masters in Cultural Anthropology from Columbia. No criminal record, good credit score, but modest finances. Currently self-employed as a personal consultant, whatever that meant. No significant social media presence. In short, nothing that explained the effect she seemed to have on him. The next evening found Maxwell directing his driver to a quiet street in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. He'd followed Olivia's instruction to dress casually, trading his usual suit for designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most residents of this neighborhood made in a week. "Are you sure this is the right address, sir?" James asked, as they pulled up to a modest building with a small, hand-painted sign reading Rosalinda's. "Wait here," Maxwell instructed, stepping out onto the sidewalk. The restaurant wasn't at all what he expected. No valet, no maitre d', not even a proper host stand. Just a warm space filled with the aroma of spices and the sound of lively conversation. The walls were painted a deep red and covered with photographs and art from across Latin America. Most of the patrons appeared to be locals, families, couples, groups of friends enjoying each other's company. Maxwell felt conspicuously out of place until he spotted Olivia at a corner table. She waved him over, looking perfectly at home in a simple blue. "Klaus, you found it," she said as he took the seat across from her. "My driver was convinced we were in the wrong place." "I imagine this isn't in your regular rotation of dining establishments." A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile approached their table. "Olivia, so good to see you again." "Rosa, this is my friend Maxwell," Olivia introduced them. "Maxwell, this is Rosalinda Suarez, the owner and chef." "First time at my restaurant?" Rosa asked, sizing him up with a shrewd glance. "Yes, it is," Maxwell admitted. "Then you must try my special. No menu for you tonight. I decide what you eat." She patted Olivia's shoulder. "This one, she knows good food." Before Maxwell could protest this unprecedented removal of choice, Rosa had disappeared into the kitchen. "She doesn't know who I am," Maxwell realized aloud. "Would it matter if she did?" Olivia asked. "People usually treat me differently when they know." "And you like that?" It wasn't a question. Maxwell considered her words. "It's efficient. Opens doors and closes others." Olivia thanked a young waiter who brought them water in simple glasses, not the crystal stemware Maxwell was accustomed to. "How did you discover this place?" Maxwell asked, looking around at the modest surroundings. "Rosa's son was a student in a class I taught at Brooklyn College. Guest lecturer," she explained. "He brought me here after the semester ended. I've been coming ever since. You teach as well. Your resume gets more interesting by the minute." "I've worn many hats," she replied. "Teaching is just one of them. I find people fascinating, their stories, their journeys. Is that why you're here with me? Am I a fascinating subject for your anthropological study?" Olivia smiled. "Everyone has a story worth knowing, Maxwell. Even billionaires who think they've seen it all." Before he could respond, Rosa returned with plates of food that smelled incredible. No fancy presentation, no tiny portions artfully arranged. Just generous homemade dishes that steamed with fragrant spices. "My grandmother's recipes," Rosa explained proudly. "From Oaxaca. Enjoy." Maxwell couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten Mexican food that didn't come from a high-end fusion restaurant. The first bite surprised him with its complexity and depth of flavor. "This is really good," he admitted. "Better than the $200 tasting menu at Luminescence?" Olivia asked with a knowing smile. "Different," Maxwell hedged. Then, seeing her expression, added, "Maybe better." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Maxwell was surprised to find himself relaxing in this unfamiliar environment. There were no business associates to impress, no social climbers watching his every move. "You know," he said eventually, "you never really answered my question about what you—" Tado said, "I told you. I help people find what they've lost." "That's cryptic, not informative." Olivia took a sip of her water. "I work with individuals who have reached a point in their lives where something is missing. Success, wealth, achievement. They have all the external markers of a good life, but something feels hollow." "You're a therapist?" Maxwell frowned. "No, though there are therapeutic elements to what I do. I'm more of a guide. I help people reconnect with forgotten aspects of themselves. Values, dreams, relationships they've left behind on their climb to the top. And people pay you for this service." "Those who can, yes." "Those who can't, I work with pro bono." Maxwell leaned back in his chair. "Sounds like a convenient way to access wealthy people's lives and bank accounts." Instead of being offended, Olivia laughed, always the skeptic. "I would expect nothing less from Maxwell Reed. How do you know my name? We never established that before our formal introduction." "Your reputation precedes you. The financial press calls you the Oracle of Wall Street." She took another bite of her food. "Though I suspect that's not how you began." Something in her tone made Maxwell uneasy, as if she knew things about him that he preferred to keep buried. "We all start somewhere," he said vaguely. "True, where did you start, Maxwell?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. Most people in his social circle avoided personal questions, preferring the comfortable superficiality of their interactions. "Connecticut," he replied shortly. "Privileged upbringing, Ivy League education, standard path to Wall Street." "Is that the story you tell at cocktail parties, or the truth?" Maxwell narrowed his eyes. "What exactly are you getting at, Ms. Barnes?" "Just making conversation," she said lightly, but her eyes told a different story. "I find it interesting that there's almost no public record of Maxwell Reed before your Goldman Sachs days. No alumni interviews mentioning your college experience, no hometown newspaper clippings about the local boy made good." Maxwell set down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone. "You've been investigating me. Let's call it professional curiosity." Olivia's expression softened. "I'm not trying to expose you, Maxwell. I'm trying to understand you. There's nothing to understand. I'm successful. I worked hard. End of story." "Is it?" she asked quietly. The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Maxwell was saved from answering by Rosa, who returned to check on their meal. "Everything good?" she asked, beaming with pride. "Wonderful, Rosa, as always," Olivia assured her. "And for the gentleman?" Rosa looked expectantly at Maxwell. Despite his discomfort with the turn in conversation, Maxwell found himself unable to be anything but honest. "It's the best meal I've had in months." Rosa's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Good, you come back any time." Friends of Olivia are friends of Rosa. After she left, Maxwell studied Olivia with renewed interest. "You have an unusual effect on people." "How so?" "They trust you, open up to you. Perhaps because I'm genuinely interested in them as people, not as assets or obstacles." The subtle critique wasn't lost on Maxwell. "And you think I'm not?" "I think somewhere along the way, you started measuring everything and everyone in terms of utility and value. Even yourself." Maxwell leaned forward. "You don't know me, Olivia. One dinner at an exclusive restaurant and another at a hole in the wall don't qualify you to psychoanalyze me." "You're right," she conceded easily. "I don't know you. Not fully. But I'd like to." "Why?" Olivia considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I think there's more to Maxwell Reed than the billionaire financier the world sees. And I think perhaps you're starting to wonder the same thing." Maxwell sat back, unsettled by her perception. Few people in his life had ever looked beyond his wealth and power to the man beneath. Fewer still had challenged him to do the same. "I should be going," he said abruptly, reaching for his wallet. "I've already taken care of it," Olivia informed him. "You paid for dinner?" Maxwell couldn't hide his surprise. "Is that so hard to believe?" "No one pays for me." "Perhaps that's part of the problem," Olivia said softly. "When was the last time someone gave you something with no expectation of return?" Maxwell couldn't answer. In his world, everything was a transaction. Gifts came with invisible strings, kindnesses with unspoken debts. "I have an invitation for you," Olivia said, changing the subject. This Saturday, I'm hosting a small gathering at my home. Nothing fancy, just friends sharing a meal and conversation. I'd like you to come." "Why would I want to do that?" "Because you're curious," she replied simply. "And because it might show you something your usual social circles can't." Maxwell should have declined. A dinner party in what was undoubtedly a modest apartment, with people he didn't know. It was absurd. Yet he found himself asking, "What time?" Olivia smiled as if she'd never doubted his acceptance. "7, I'll text you the address." She stood, gathering her bag. "Thank you for stepping outside your comfort zone tonight, Maxwell." As she left, Maxwell realized something strange. For the first time in years, he'd spent an entire evening without checking his phone once. Saturday arrived, and Maxwell found himself standing outside a pre-war brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn, questioning his decision to come. He'd almost cancelled 3 times. His assistant had reminded him of 2 exclusive events happening that same evening. A charity gala, where the governor would be present, and a private dinner with a potential business partner worth billions. Maxwell Reed didn't turn down such opportunities, especially not for dinner parties in Brooklyn, yet here he was, holding an expensive bottle of wine and feeling oddly nervous. He pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B. Moments later, Olivia's voice came through the speaker. "Maxwell, come on up." The building had no doorman, no elevator, just worn marble stairs that Maxwell climbed to reach the 3rd floor. The hallway was clean but modest, nothing like the opulent corridors of his Manhattan building with its uniformed staff and fresh flower arrangements. Before he could knock, the door opened, revealing Olivia in a simple green dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Behind her, Maxwell could hear music and conversation. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I wasn't entirely sure you would." "Neither was I," Maxwell admitted, handing her the wine. "Dom Perignon? You really couldn't help yourself, could you?" She was teasing him, but there was something knowing in her smile. Maxwell shrugged. "Old habits. Come in. Let me introduce you to everyone." Olivia's apartment was nothing like Maxwell had expected. It wasn't large, but it was filled with light from tall windows and decorated with objects that spoke of a life well-traveled. Textiles that looked Moroccan, artwork from various cultures, and books. So many books, lining built-in shelves and stacked on side tables. It wasn't professionally designed like Maxwell's sterile penthouse, but it felt unmistakably like a home. The gathering was small, just 6 other guests, all seated comfortably in the living area. They looked up as Maxwell entered, curiosity evident in their expressions. "Everyone, this is Maxwell Reed," Olivia announced. "Maxwell, meet my friends." The introductions went around the room. Eleanor, a pediatric surgeon. Her husband, David, a high school English teacher. Marcus, who ran a community center in Harlem. Sophia, a documentary filmmaker. And an older couple, Robert and Grace Chen, who owned a bookstore in Chinatown that had been in their family for generations. Maxwell braced himself for the usual reactions when people realized who he was, the fawning. The subtle networking attempts, the barely concealed interest in his wealth. But it never came. Either these people didn't recognize his name, or more disconcertingly, they didn't care. "Have a seat, Maxwell," Olivia gestured to an empty spot on the couch. "We were just discussing Sophia's new film project." As the conversation resumed, Maxwell observed the dynamics of the group. These weren't the power players he usually surrounded himself with. They didn't speak in carefully coded language, designed to impress or intimidate. Instead, there was genuine enthusiasm as Sophia described her documentary about urban gardening initiatives in low-income neighborhoods. "The community garden in the Bronx is incredible," she was saying. "They've transformed an empty lot into this oasis that now provides fresh produce for over 50 families. That's the one Marcus helped start, right?" David asked. Marcus nodded. 5 years ago, but it's the residents who've made it thrive. They've created something beautiful out of nothing. "The true alchemy of community," Robert Chen added, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who had learned English as a second language. "Much like the neighborhood associations that helped Chinatown survive in the 70s, when the city abandoned us." Maxwell found himself listening with unexpected interest. These weren't the conversations he was used to. Market trends, investment strategies, the latest luxury purchases. These people talked about things that mattered to them on a human level, not a financial one. Dinner was served at a table that had been extended to accommodate everyone. The meal wasn't catered. Olivia and her friends had prepared it themselves. Dishes were passed, family style, a far cry from the precisely plated cuisine Maxwell typically consumed. "So, Maxwell," Eleanor said during a lull in conversation, "Olivia tells us you work in finance." Maxwell nodded, waiting for the inevitable questions about the market or requests for investment advice. Instead, Elena asked, "Do you enjoy it?" The simple question caught him off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked if he enjoyed his work? It was assumed that success equaled satisfaction. "I'm good at it," he answered carefully. "That's not the same thing," Grace Chen observed quietly. "No, I suppose it isn't." Maxwell took a sip of wine. "But yes, I enjoy the challenge, the strategy of it." "What drew you to finance initially?" Robert asked. "Was it a passion from youth?" Maxwell hesitated. The truth, that he'd seen finance as the fastest route to the wealth and power he craved, seemed suddenly shallow in this company. "I recognized an opportunity," he said finally. "I had an aptitude for numbers and strategy." "Pragmatic," Marcus nodded. "Though I've found the most fulfilling work comes from deeper wells than aptitude alone." "What do you mean?" Maxwell found himself genuinely curious. "I think he means purpose," Sophia interjected. "The why behind the work, beyond material success." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "I could have made more money in the corporate world. But the work I do now connects to something essential in me, a need to contribute, to help create the kind of community I wished for as a kid growing up in Harlem." Maxwell considered this. His own why had always been clear: to win, to accumulate, to prove himself in the most measurable way possible. But lately that motivation had begun to feel hollow. Not everyone has the luxury of choosing purpose over practicality, Maxwell pointed out. "True," David acknowledged. "But sometimes what looks like practicality is actually fear disguised as pragmatism." "Fear?" Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "Fear of failing at something that matters deeply," David explained. "It's safer to succeed at something you're not emotionally invested in." The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. Maxwell changed the subject. "Olivia hasn't actually explained what brought this diverse group together. What's the common thread?" The others exchanged glances and smiles as if sharing a private joke. "Olivia," Grace said simply, "she has a gift for bringing together people who need to know each other, even if they don't realize it yet." "She found us at transition points," Eleanor added, "when we were questioning our paths or feeling stuck." Maxwell looked at Olivia, who had been quietly observing the conversation. "Is that what I am? A project? Someone stuck at a transition point?" "Everyone reaches crossroads, Maxwell," she replied calmly. "Even billionaires." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as the meal continued. Maxwell found himself laughing at David's stories about teaching literature to teenagers, moved by Elena's descriptions of her young patient's resilience, and fascinated by Robert and Grace's tales of Chinatown in the 1970s. After dinner, they moved back to the living room area. Robert noticed a chess set on a side table and challenged Maxwell to a game. Maxwell accepted, confident in his abilities. He'd played against champions at charity events. To his surprise, Robert proved a formidable opponent. His strategy wasn't textbook, but was deeply intuitive and unpredictable. As they played, conversation flowed around them. "Olivia mentioned you're a collector, Maxwell," Sophia said. "Art, isn't it?" Maxwell nodded, studying the board. "Contemporary mainly, some classics." "Any particular pieces you connect with personally?" Grace asked. The question echoed Olivia's from their first meeting. Maxwell moved his bishop before answering. "There's a Rothko in my office that I find centering. The depth of color creates a sense of infinity." "You actually look at it then," Olivia remarked. "Not just assess its value." Maxwell gave her a wry smile. "Contrary to what you might think, I do appreciate beauty for its own sake." "Check," Robert announced. "His knight threatening Maxwell's king." Maxwell frowned at the board, surprised by the move he hadn't anticipated. He managed to escape the immediate threat, but found himself playing defensively. As the evening wore on, Maxwell realized he was enjoying himself more than he had at any social gathering in recent memory. There was no pretense here, no networking, no subtle competition. Just people sharing their lives and thoughts openly. When Robert finally declared checkmate, Maxwell accepted defeat with genuine grace. "Well played. I underestimated you." "A common mistake in chess and in life," Robert replied with a twinkle in his eye. "We often misjudge those we perceive as less powerful." As the guests began to leave, each thanked Olivia warmly and, to Maxwell's surprise, expressed genuine pleasure at meeting him. Not because of who he was in the financial world, but simply as a person they'd shared an evening with. The Chens were the last to go. As they gathered their things, Grace pressed something into Maxwell's hand. "A gift," she said. "Something I think you might appreciate." Maxwell looked down at a small weathered book of poetry. "Thank you, but I don't really read poetry." Grace finished for him with a knowing smile. "Perhaps that's why you should. Words have power, Mr. Reed. Sometimes they remind us of truths we've forgotten." After everyone had left, Maxwell helped Olivia clear the table despite her protests. "You don't have to do that," she said, watching him stack plates. "I know." He carried them to the kitchen. "Your friends are not what I expected. What did you expect?" "Honestly, idealistic do-gooders who'd lecture me about wealth inequality." Olivia laughed. "And instead?" "Instead, I found thoughtful people who asked better questions than most of the thought leaders I encounter at $5,000 a plate dinners." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, Olivia washing while Maxwell dried. It was such a mundane domestic activity, something Maxwell couldn't remember ever doing before. Even as a child, there had been staff for such tasks. "Why did you invite me tonight, Olivia?" "Really?" She considered the question as she handed him a wine glass to dry. "Because I thought you might benefit from an evening with people who want nothing from you except your presence and perspective." "And why would you care what benefits me?" Olivia turned to face him fully, her expression serious. "Do you believe people only help others out of self-interest?" "In my experience, yes," Maxwell answered honestly. "Everyone wants something." What a lonely perspective. She took the dried glass from his hands, her fingers briefly touching his. "Perhaps I'm trying to expand your experience." Maxwell felt an unexpected warmth at her touch, a connection that went beyond the physical. "You're a mystery, Olivia Barnes." "Not really. I'm quite straightforward." She put the last dish away and leaned against the counter. "What did you think of the evening, honestly?" "It was—" Maxwell searched for the right words. "Refreshing. Your friends lead very different lives from mine." "Different, but are they less valuable?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Olivia's gaze was penetrating but not unkind. "You measure value in dollars and influence, Maxwell. It's the lens through which you view the world. And you don't?" He challenged. "I try to see people as they are, not for what they can provide or produce." "That sounds idealistic and impractical." "Does it?" She smiled slightly. "Yet you found value in tonight's conversation, despite the fact that no one here could advance your career or increase your wealth." Maxwell couldn't argue with that. He had enjoyed the evening, had found himself genuinely engaged in a way he rarely experienced anymore. "I should go," he said finally, retrieving his jacket from the back of a chair. "Thank you for the invitation." It was illuminating. Olivia walked him to the door. "I have another invitation for you if you're interested." "Another dinner party?" "No, something different." She hesitated. "The community garden Sophia mentioned. I volunteer there on Wednesday afternoons. If you'd like to see it, I could show you around." Maxwell stared at her. "You want me to visit a community garden in the Bronx?" "Yes. Why?" "Because it might show you something you haven't seen before." She held his gaze. "Unless you're too busy with more important matters." It was a gentle challenge, and Maxwell recognized it as such. "What time on Wednesday?" "I'll be there at 3. Maxwell nodded. "Text me the address." As he walked down the stairs and out into the Brooklyn night, Maxwell realized he was still holding the book of poetry Grace had given him. He opened it under a streetlight and read the inscription she'd written inside the cover. "To Maxwell, may you find what you're looking for, even if it isn't what you thought you sought. Grace Chen." Maxwell closed the book, tucked it into his pocket, and signaled for his waiting car. As the luxury vehicle pulled away from the curb, he glanced back at the warm light still shining from Olivia's window and wondered what exactly he was getting himself into. Wednesday arrived with unseasonable warmth for early May. Maxwell had rescheduled 2 meetings, and delegated a conference call to make time for his visit to the Bronx. He told himself it was mere curiosity, a brief anthropological excursion into a world he rarely encountered. Yet as his driver navigated away from the gleaming skyscrapers of Manhattan toward the northernmost borough, Maxwell felt an unfamiliar nervousness. "Are you sure about this address, sir?" James asked for the second time as they turned onto a street lined with modest apartment buildings and small businesses with signs in both English and Spanish. "Yes," Maxwell replied, looking out the window at a neighborhood that bore little resemblance to the carefully curated environments he typically inhabited. The car stopped beside a lot that had been transformed into an unexpected oasis of green. What had once been abandoned space was now filled with carefully tended garden beds, small fruit trees and vibrant flowers. Her colorful mural adorned the wall of the adjacent building, depicting community members of all ages working together. Maxwell spotted Olivia immediately. She was kneeling beside a raised garden bed, helping an elderly woman plant something. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair tied back in a practical ponytail, looking completely at home in surroundings that should have been alien to someone Maxwell had first met in New York's most exclusive restaurant. "I'll call you when I'm ready to leave," Maxwell told James, who couldn't hide his surprise at being dismissed in this neighborhood. As Maxwell approached the garden's entrance, a gate made from repurposed materials artfully welded together, he felt conspicuously out of place in his tailored, casual wear and Italian loafers. Several people looked up from their work, expressions curious but not unwelcoming. Olivia noticed him and stood, wiping her hands on her jeans before coming to greet him. "You actually came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I said I would." Maxwell glanced around. "This is not what I expected. What did you expect?" "Something smaller, less organized," Olivia smiled. "Community doesn't mean chaos, Maxwell. Come, let me show you around." What followed was an education. Olivia introduced Maxwell to garden members who shared their stories openly. There was Mrs. Ramirez, a grandmother who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years and now grew vegetables she remembered from her childhood in Puerto Rico. The Rodriguez brothers, teenagers who had initially come to the garden to fulfill community service requirements, but stayed because they'd discovered a talent for growing things. Emeka, a Nigerian immigrant who worked nights as a cab driver and spent his afternoons tending herbs from his homeland. "We have 43 families who maintain plots here," Olivia explained as they walked the neatly laid-out paths, plus a communal section where we grow produce for the local food pantry. "And this was all created by volunteers?" Maxwell asked, genuinely impressed. "With help from a few grants and donations for materials. Marcus, from dinner the other night, helped secure the land through a community land trust. That means it can never be developed commercially." Maxwell, who had built his fortune partly through strategic real estate development in emerging neighborhoods, felt a twinge of something like guilt. How many community spaces had been sacrificed for luxury condominiums in his portfolio? "The garden does more than grow food," Olivia continued. "It's a gathering place, an outdoor classroom, sometimes a performance space." She pointed to a small circular area with bench seating. "Last summer, the local kids put on a play there about environmental conservation. They wrote it themselves." As they walked, Maxwell noticed how people greeted each other, the easy familiarity, the small kindnesses exchanged alongside gardening tips and produce. It was a web of relationships utterly different from his professional networks, based on utility and strategic advantage. "Miss Olivia! Miss Olivia!" a small voice called out. A girl of about 8 came running up, her braids bouncing. "The strawberries are turning red." "Come see." "That's wonderful news, Zoe," Olivia smiled warmly. "This is my friend, Mr. Reed. Would it be okay if he came to see your strawberries too?" Zoe regarded Maxwell with solemn assessment before nodding. "He can come, but he has to be careful not to step on any plants." "I'll be very careful," Maxwell promised, surprising himself with his earnestness. Zoe led them to a small plot where, indeed, tiny strawberries were beginning to ripen among the green leaves. "I planted them myself," she announced proudly, "from little baby plants. And I water them every day after school." "They look excellent," Maxwell said, kneeling down despite his expensive pants. "You must be a very skilled gardener." Zoe beamed at the compliment. Miss Olivia taught me. She knows everything about growing things. Maxwell glanced at Olivia, who was watching the interaction with a soft smile. Another layer of mystery added to what he knew about this woman. My mom's making strawberry shortcake when they're all ripe, Zoe continued. You can come have some if you want. The guileless invitation touched something in Maxwell. When was the last time someone had offered him anything without an agenda? That's very kind of you, he replied. After Zoe ran off to join her friends, Maxwell turned to Olivia. So you continue to surprise me. How so? You move between worlds with remarkable ease. High-end restaurants one day, community gardens the next. They're not separate worlds, Maxwell, just different expressions of the same one. She gestured for him to follow her to a bench in a shaded corner of the garden. Would it surprise you to know I grew up in a place not unlike this? Yes, he admitted. You seem so polished. Because I know which fork to use at luminescence? She laughed lightly. My mother was a librarian who believed education was the great equalizer. She made sure I read everything, experienced as much culture as she could expose me to on a limited budget. And your father? Something flickered in Olivia's eyes. He wasn't in the picture. It was just Mom and me in a small apartment in Seattle. She looked around the garden. Places like this saved me as a teenager. Community centers, after-school programs, volunteer opportunities. They showed me possibilities beyond my immediate circumstances. Maxwell absorbed this new information, trying to reconcile it with the enigmatic woman who had walked so confidently into his world. Is that why you do this? Repaying a debt to similar communities? Partly, she acknowledged. But it's also selfish in a way. These connections nourish me. The financial world you inhabit, Maxwell, it runs on transaction. This runs on relationship. As if to illustrate her point, a woman approached with a basket of freshly harvested greens, offering some to Olivia with warm familiarity. Olivia introduced Maxwell, and to his surprise, the woman insisted he take some kale as well. First-time visitors always leave with something, she explained with a grin. Garden rules. After she left, Maxwell looked at the leafy greens in his hands with bemusement. What am I supposed to do with this? My chef isn't expecting me to bring home ingredients. Olivia laughed. You could try cooking something yourself. I don't cook. Never. Maxwell tried to remember the last time he'd prepared food for himself. College, perhaps, and even then it had been limited to basic necessities. It's not a skill I've needed to develop, he said defensively. Maybe it's not about need. Olivia stood. Come on, I have an idea. She led him to a small structure at the back of the garden, a communal kitchen with basic equipment where garden members could prepare and share meals. Despite Maxwell's protests, she guided him through making a simple salad with the gifted kale, tomatoes from another gardener, and a dressing they prepared together. I can't believe I'm doing this, Maxwell muttered as he awkwardly tore kale leaves. Engaging with your food directly? It's a fundamental human experience you've outsourced, Olivia teased gently. How does it feel? Maxwell was about to give a dismissive answer when he realized something. This simple act, creating something with his own hands, however basic, carried a satisfaction he hadn't anticipated. It's not terrible, he admitted. When they sat to eat their creation at a small outdoor table, Maxwell was surprised again. The simple salad tasted vibrant in a way that even the most expensive restaurant fare often didn't. There's something about eating what you've helped create, Olivia observed, noticing his expression. It's just a salad, Maxwell said, but without conviction. It's participation, she corrected. Most of your life is spent consuming what others produce, food, art, entertainment, even relationships. But there's a different kind of fulfillment in being a creator, even of something small. As the afternoon progressed, Maxwell found himself drawn into the garden's rhythms. He rolled up his sleeves to help an older man turn compost, listened to a retired teacher explain the pollinator garden she maintained, and even helped a group of children water newly planted seedlings, not caring when water splashed his expensive shoes. By the time the sun began to lower, casting golden light across the garden, Maxwell realized hours had passed. He hadn't checked his phone once, a nearly unprecedented lapse for a man who measured time in quarter-hour billing increments. I should be going, he said finally. Surprised by his reluctance, Olivia nodded. Thank you for coming. I know this isn't your usual scene. As they walked toward the gate, Maxwell noticed a small building across the street with a sign reading Bronx Heritage Center. Several framed photographs were visible in the window. "What's that place?" he asked. "A neighborhood museum of sorts. They preserve local history, collect stories and artifacts from residents. It's run entirely by volunteers." Something about it caught Maxwell's interest. "Is it open now?" "Should be. They're open until 6 most days." Maxwell surprised himself by suggesting, "Let's take a look." The Heritage Center was small but thoughtfully organized, with exhibits documenting the neighborhood's evolution over decades. Black and white photographs showed streets that were recognizable but transformed, faces of residents from different eras, celebrations and hardships alike. One section was dedicated to family histories, with donated items and stories from longtime residents. Maxwell found himself drawn to a display of old books, letters, and photographs from the 1940s and 50s. "These belonged to the Wright family," explained an elderly volunteer who had approached quietly. "They moved here from Georgia during the Great Migration. Mr. Wright worked in construction, helped build some of the major infrastructure we still use today." Maxwell nodded politely, examining the artifacts. His eye caught on an old leather-bound book among the items. Something about it seemed vaguely familiar. "That's the family Bible," the volunteer explained. "Look at the beautiful handwritten entries." The Bible was open to pages where births, marriages, and passings had been carefully recorded across generations. As Maxwell leaned closer to read the faded handwriting, a name jumped out at him: Reed. "Eliza Wright married Thomas Reed. 1953, he read aloud. "Yes, the daughter married a local boy." The volunteer nodded. "They moved to Harlem after that, I believe." Maxwell stared at the name, an unexpected tightness in his chest. Reed wasn't an uncommon surname, but the coincidence felt significant. "Are you all right?" Olivia asked quietly, noting his expression. "Fine," he said automatically, straightening up. But he wasn't fine. Something about seeing that name, Reed, in this context, in this place so far removed from his current life, had unsettled him deeply. "Thank you for showing us the exhibit," Olivia told the volunteer, who smiled and moved to help other visitors. Outside, the evening air had cooled. Maxwell stood on the sidewalk, feeling strangely disoriented. "Maxwell?" Olivia's voice was gentle. "What happened in there?" He shook his head. "Nothing important. A coincidence." She didn't press, but her eyes told him she knew there was more to it. "Would you like to get something to eat? There's a great Dominican place around the corner." The thought of returning to his empty penthouse suddenly seemed unbearable. "Yes," he heard himself say, "that would be nice." The restaurant was small and bustling, filled with local families and delicious aromas. They found a table in the corner, and Olivia ordered for them in fluent Spanish. The owners greeted her like an old friend. "You come here often?" Maxwell asked. "When I'm in the neighborhood?" Maria and Eduardo opened this place 20 years ago. All 3 of their children went to college on restaurant earnings. Their food arrived, hearty, flavorful dishes that bore no resemblance to the refined cuisine Maxwell typically consumed, but satisfied something deeper than hunger. "Tell me about your family." "Maxwell," Olivia said after they had eaten in companionable silence for a few minutes. "Not much to tell. Parents divorced when I was young. Father remarried, moved to Europe. Mother stayed in Connecticut with me." The practiced narrative felt hollow suddenly, a sanitized version of a more complex truth. "No siblings?" "No." "And now? Are you close with either parent?" Maxwell shrugged. "My father passed some years ago. My mother and I speak occasionally." "I'm sorry about your father," Olivia said with genuine sympathy. "Don't be. We weren't close." Maxwell took a drink of water, wishing it was something stronger. "What about you? You mentioned your mother. Is she still in Seattle?" A shadow crossed Olivia's face. "She passed away 5 years ago, cancer." "I'm sorry," Maxwell said, and meant it. She had a good life, not easy, but meaningful. She touched many lives through her work at the library. Olivia smiled softly at the memory. "She used to say that books were bridges. They could take you anywhere, connect you to anyone, even across time." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was. She taught me to look beneath the surface, to see the stories behind people's facades." Olivia studied him. "Everyone has them, you know. The stories they tell others, and the truer ones they keep hidden." Maxwell felt exposed under her gaze, as if she could see through the carefully constructed narrative of his life to something he had long buried. "What made you ask me to the garden today?" he asked, changing the subject. "I thought you might benefit from seeing a different kind of wealth." "Wealth?" Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting choice of words, isn't it? We use rich and poor as if they only apply to financial resources. But there are so many forms of abundance." She gestured around them. "The connections I witnessed today, people sharing knowledge, time, food, stories, that's wealth too." "It doesn't pay the bills," Maxwell pointed out. "No, but it feeds something else, something that billions in a bank account often can't." They walked back to the garden, where Maxwell had left his car hours earlier. The evening had settled fully now, strings of solar lights illuminating the garden paths where a few members still lingered, harvesting last items or simply enjoying the peace. "Thank you for today," Maxwell said, surprising himself with his sincerity. "It was educational," Olivia smiled. "High praise from a man who graduated summa cum laude from Harvard." Maxwell stiffened slightly. "I never mentioned Harvard. Didn't you?" Olivia looked unconcerned by the slip. "I must have read it somewhere." Before he could pursue the point, she changed the subject. "I'm hosting a small exhibition at a gallery in Soho next Friday evening. Local artists, focused on themes of community and memory. Would you come?" The invitation was unexpected, but Maxwell found himself nodding. "Text me the details." As his car pulled away, Maxwell looked back to see Olivia rejoining the garden community, instantly enveloped in their easy camaraderie. She moved through that world with a natural grace that made him wonder, not for the first time, who Olivia Barnes really was and what she wanted from him. Back in his penthouse, Maxwell found himself standing before his collection of rare books, acquisitions recommended by a consultant, their value carefully tracked in his portfolio. The contrast with the worn family Bible he'd seen at the Heritage Center couldn't have been starker. These books, for all their monetary worth, held no personal history, no connection to anything beyond their investment potential. He showered and changed, then poured himself a scotch from a bottle that cost more than most of the gardeners he'd met today earned in a month. The thought made him uncomfortable in a way it never had before. Maxwell moved to his home office and opened his laptop, intending to catch up on the work he'd missed. Instead, he found himself typing Bronx Reed family history into a search engine. The results were sparse, nothing that seemed connected to him personally. He tried a few more searches before closing the laptop in frustration. On his bedside table lay the book of poetry Grace Chen had given him. On impulse, he picked it up and opened to a random page. The poem was short, something about paths not taken and the courage to look back. Maxwell read it twice, then closed the book, unsettled by how the simple verses seemed to speak directly to thoughts he'd barely acknowledged. As he lay in bed that night, in sheets that cost thousands and a mattress engineered for perfect comfort, Maxwell found himself thinking not of deals or acquisitions, but of kale growing in unlikely places and names, written in faded ink in an old family Bible. For the first time in years, Maxwell Reed questioned the story he had told himself about who he was and where he had come from. The week passed in a blur of meetings and deals, but Maxwell found his thoughts repeatedly drifting to his afternoon in the Bronx. The faces of the gardeners, the unexpected pleasure of creating something with his own hands, the strange coincidence of the Reed name in the Heritage Center. These memories intruded on conference calls and boardroom discussions, making it difficult to focus on the high-stakes business that had always consumed him. Friday evening arrived, and Maxwell found himself standing outside a small gallery in Soho, checking the address Olivia had sent against the understated sign. Threshold Gallery, where art meets memory. It wasn't one of the prestigious galleries where Maxwell occasionally appeared at openings to network with other wealthy collectors. This space had a more intimate feel, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk through large windows that revealed a modest crowd inside. Maxwell straightened his tie. He'd come directly from the office and entered. The gallery was a single open room with white walls and polished concrete floors. Photographs, paintings, and mixed media pieces lined the walls, while several sculptural works occupied the center space. People moved between the displays, wine glasses in hand, engaged in animated conversation. He spotted Olivia across the room, speaking with an older woman in front of a large canvas. She wore a simple black dress that managed to look both elegant and accessible, much like Olivia herself, Maxwell thought. As if sensing his presence, she looked up and met his eyes, a smile of genuine pleasure crossing her face. She excused herself from her conversation and made her way toward him. "Maxwell, I'm glad you came." She handed him a glass of wine from a passing server. "What do you think?" "I just arrived," he said, glancing around. "Intimate space. The gallery owner believes art should be experienced in a personal way, not as a commercial transaction." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "Yet everything here has a price tag." "Artists need to eat," Olivia acknowledged with a smile. "But the primary purpose is connection, not commerce. Come, let me show you around." As they moved through the gallery, Maxwell was surprised by the quality of the work. These weren't established names in the art world, but the pieces showed genuine talent and emotional depth. Olivia introduced him to several of the artists, a former construction worker who created intricate sculptures from salvaged building materials, a young woman whose photographs documented changing neighborhoods through portraits of long-time residents, an elderly man whose paintings captured vanishing scenes of old New York with remarkable precision. "Mr. Reed is a significant collector," Olivia told one young artist, whose mixed media pieces incorporated fragments of discarded items transformed into striking compositions. "Really? What kind of work interests you?" the artist asked earnestly. Maxwell started to give his standard answer about investment value and emerging trends, but stopped himself. "Actually, I'm still discovering that," he admitted instead. The young artist nodded thoughtfully. "That's the most honest answer I've heard from a collector. Most come in with shopping lists." As they continued through the exhibition, Maxwell found himself genuinely engaged with the art in a way that was unfamiliar. Without the pressure to evaluate potential acquisitions for their investment potential, he was free to simply respond to the works emotionally. "This one speaks to you," Olivia observed, as Maxwell lingered before a painting of an old bookstore interior, golden light illuminating shelves of worn volumes and a single, solitary reader absorbed in a book by the window. "It reminds me of something," Maxwell said quietly. "I can't quite place what." "Sometimes art reminds us of feelings rather than specific memories," Olivia suggested. "This piece is by Edward Chen. Chen. Any relation to Robert and Grace?" "Their son. He painted this from memories of growing up in their bookstore." Maxwell studied the painting more closely. There was something almost sacred in the way the light fell on the books, transforming a humble commercial space into something that felt more like a sanctuary. "It's beautiful," he said simply. "It is," Olivia agreed. "Edward captures not just the physical space, but the emotional resonance of it, what that bookstore meant to the community it served for generations." As they moved away, Maxwell asked, "Is this what you do? Connect artists from underrepresented communities with potential patrons?" "Sometimes," Olivia acknowledged. "Art creates bridges between worlds that might otherwise never intersect. Like community gardens in the Bronx?" She smiled. "Exactly like that. Different expressions of the same impulse to create beauty and meaning, to preserve stories that might otherwise be lost." They paused at a display case containing several old books, letters, and photographs, similar to what Maxwell had seen at the Heritage Center. "This is part of a project documenting family histories in changing neighborhoods," Olivia explained. "People donate or loan family artifacts, and artists create responses to them." Maxwell leaned closer to examine the items. There was something compelling about these tangible connections to the past. The worn pages, the handwritten inscriptions, the faded photographs of people long gone but preserved in these fragments of memory. "You seem particularly drawn to the historical artifacts," Olivia observed. "They feel authentic," Maxwell said, searching for the right word. "Not created for display or investment. Because they weren't, they were created for connection, to record memories, to communicate across time, to preserve what mattered." As they continued through the gallery, Maxwell found himself increasingly aware of a tension between his practiced identity as a wealthy collector and his genuine response to the works before him. When had art become merely another asset class for him? Had it ever been anything else? Midway through the evening, Olivia was called away to help with a minor issue. Maxwell found himself alone, contemplating a sculpture made from reclaimed wood that somehow managed to evoke both decay and renewal. "First time at Threshold?" a voice beside him asked. Maxwell turned to find an elegantly dressed woman in her 60s, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob, intelligent eyes assessing him with interest. "Yes," he admitted. "I'm here at Olivia's invitation." "Ah, Olivia." The woman's expression warmed. "She has a talent for bringing the right people to the right art at the right time. I'm Eleanor Vance, by the way. This is my gallery." Maxwell Reed. He waited for the recognition, the subtle shift in demeanor that usually accompanied his introduction. "Pleasure to meet you, Maxwell." Eleanor showed no particular reaction to his name. "What do you think of the exhibition?" "It's not what I expected," he answered honestly. "There's an emotional resonance to the work that's quite compelling. That's exactly what we aim for. Art that engages more than the eye or the wallet." She gestured around the room. "Most of these artists will never be featured in Christie's auctions or collected by major museums, but their work speaks truth about lives and communities that deserve to be seen." "You don't care about commercial success?" Maxwell asked, genuinely curious. "Of course I do. Artists need to eat and I need to keep the lights on. But that's not the primary purpose." Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "Olivia mentioned you're a collector." "Of a sort," Maxwell hedged. "Mainly contemporary works with established investment profiles." Eleanor smiled. "Ah, the art as asset approach. Very common these days. You disapprove?" "Not at all. It's just a different relationship to art than the one I find most rewarding." She nodded toward the wooden sculpture before them. "Take this piece." The artist, Jerome, was formerly incarcerated. He learned woodworking in prison, and upon release began salvaging discarded materials from gentrifying neighborhoods to create works that speak to transformation and second chances. The financial value is modest, but the human value is immense. Maxwell considered this. "And you believe the human value matters more?" "I believe they're interconnected in ways the market often fails to recognize. Art that connects deeply to human experience endures beyond market trends." She gave him a shrewd look. "But you didn't come here for a lecture on art economics." "Actually, I find it fascinating," Maxwell admitted. "In my world, value is quantifiable, fixed to measurable metrics." "And how's that working out for you?" Eleanor asked with surprising directness. Before Maxwell could formulate a response, Olivia rejoined them. "I see you've met Eleanor," she said. "We were having a fascinating discussion about value," Eleanor told her. "Your friend has an interesting perspective." "Maxwell has many interesting perspectives," Olivia replied with a warm glance in his direction, "some of which he's only beginning to discover." "Well, I should circulate," Eleanor said. "Maxwell, it was a pleasure. I hope you'll find something tonight that speaks to you beyond investment potential." With a knowing smile, she moved away to greet other guests. "Eleanor doesn't mince words," Olivia observed. "I appreciate that," Maxwell said. "Too many people in my life say what they think I want to hear." "And what do you want to hear, Maxwell?" The question caught him off guard. What did he want? The answer had seemed so clear for most of his adult life. Success, wealth, power, recognition. But lately those desires felt somehow hollow. "I'm not sure anymore," he admitted. Olivia's expression softened. "That's a courageous thing to acknowledge." The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur as Maxwell met more artists and engaged in conversations unlike any he typically had at social functions. No one asked about investment opportunities or sought his influence. Instead, they spoke passionately about their work, the communities they represented, the stories they sought to preserve. As the event wound down, Maxwell found himself returning to Edward Chen's painting of the bookstore. Standing before it, he felt an unexpected emotional pull, a nostalgia for something he'd never actually experienced. "You're drawn to this one," Olivia noted, rejoining him. "Yes," Maxwell admitted. "It evokes something I can't quite name." "It's already sold," Olivia told him. "But I'm sure Edward would be pleased to know it resonated with you." Maxwell nodded, surprised by his disappointment. It was the first piece of art in years he'd wanted, not as an investment, but simply because it moved him. As they left the gallery together, the evening air was cool and pleasant. Streetlights cast a gentle glow over the cobblestones of the Soho street. "Thank you for coming tonight," Olivia said as they stood on the sidewalk. "I know it's not your usual scene." "You seem to specialize in taking me to not my usual scenes," Maxwell observed with a slight smile. "And are you finding value in these new experiences?" Value. Maxwell considered the word. That's a loaded term these days. Only because we've narrowed its meaning. A comfortable silence fell between them. Maxwell found himself reluctant to end the evening. "Could I interest you in a late dinner? There's a good restaurant just around the corner." Olivia considered him for a moment. "Actually, I have a better idea. If you're willing to trust me. That depends on what you have in mind. Nothing too outlandish. Just another perspective on the city." She held his gaze. "Are you game?" Maxwell should have declined. He had an early meeting the next morning. Reports to review before bed. Yet he found himself nodding. "Lead the way." They took the subway, another first for Maxwell in many years, to Brooklyn Heights. Olivia led him to the promenade, a pedestrian walkway offering spectacular views of the Manhattan skyline across the East River. At this hour, it was sparsely populated, just a few couples strolling hand in hand, a lone saxophone player whose melancholy notes floated on the night air. They found an empty bench and sat, the glittering skyline spread before them like a constellation of earthbound stars. "I sometimes come here when I need perspective," Olivia said. "There's something about seeing the whole picture from a distance." Maxwell had seen the Manhattan skyline countless times, from helicopters and penthouse terraces, but viewing it from this vantage point felt different. From here, the towering buildings where he conducted business, the luxury establishments he frequented, the whole machinery of wealth and power. It all became simply light and form, beautiful but remote. "I built part of that skyline," he said quietly. "The Reed Tower, the Thompson Center, the new development on West 57th. And what does it feel like to see your creations from here?" Maxwell considered the question carefully. "Smaller," he admitted. "Part of something larger than myself." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the play of lights on the water. "Tell me something, Olivia." "Why me? You clearly move in many different circles. What made you single me out at that meeting last week?" Olivia turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you believe in meaningful coincidence, Maxwell?" "You mean fate, destiny?" "No, not exactly. I mean moments when seemingly random events align in ways that create opportunities for insight or growth." Maxwell remembered the Reed name in the family Bible at the Heritage Center. "I'm a pragmatist. Coincidences are just pattern recognition by brains wired to find meaning." "Perhaps," Olivia conceded, "or perhaps they're invitations to look deeper." "That doesn't answer my question," Olivia smiled. "Let's just say I recognized something in you that day. Something beneath the successful exterior, a question you hadn't yet formulated but were ready to ask." "And what question is that?" "That's for you to discover," she replied. "I'm just providing environments where the answer might reveal itself." Maxwell shook his head, both frustrated and intrigued by her cryptic responses. "You're very good at not giving straight answers." "Some questions don't have straight answers, Maxwell, particularly the important ones." As they continued talking, the conversation shifted to Olivia's work, the communities she engaged with, the stories she helped preserve. Maxwell found himself increasingly fascinated by her perspective, so different from his own yet compelling in its clarity and conviction. "You speak about communities and connections with such passion," he observed. "Is that what drives you? Preserving these stories?" Olivia considered the question. "Partly, but it's more about recognition, helping people see what's valuable before it's lost." She turned to him. "What about you, Maxwell? What truly drives you?" The automatic answer, success, achievement, excellence, rose to his lips but felt suddenly inadequate. "I've always been driven to prove myself," he said instead. "To show I belong at the highest levels. Belong to whom?" The simple question landed with unexpected force. Maxwell had never quite formulated it that way to himself. Who was he trying to prove his worth to after all these years? Before he could formulate an answer, his phone rang. His executive assistant's ringtone. Maxwell checked the screen with a frown. "I should take this," he said apologetically. "It's after hours." "Must be important." Olivia nodded her understanding as Maxwell stepped away to take the call. A situation had developed with an Asian market deal, nothing catastrophic, but requiring his attention before the markets opened the next day. "I'm sorry," he told Olivia when he returned. "I need to handle this tonight." "Of course," she said without resentment. "Business calls." They walked back to the subway station in comfortable silence. Before they parted, Olivia said, "There's something I'd like to show you. It connects to some of what we've been discussing. Are you free Sunday afternoon?" Maxwell should have declined. His weekend was already full of commitments, and the newly emerged situation would likely require additional attention. Yet he found himself saying, "I can make time." "What did you have in mind?" "I'll text you the address. Let's say 2 o'clock. Olivia's expression gave nothing away about what she was planning. "All right," Maxwell agreed. "It's not another community garden, is it?" Olivia smiled. "No. Something more relevant to your questions about belonging." As Maxwell's car carried him back to Manhattan, he found himself thinking about Olivia's words and the strange, compelling evening they'd shared. What had begun as a simple gallery visit had evolved into something more meaningful, a conversation that had touched on questions he rarely asked himself. Who was he trying to prove himself to? What did he truly value beyond the metrics of wealth and success? And what did Olivia Barnes see in him that made her believe he was ready to confront these questions? Back in his penthouse, Maxwell poured himself a scotch and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the very skyline he'd viewed from Brooklyn. From here, the perspective was entirely different. The buildings loomed large, powerful, dominant. Yet he found himself remembering how they had appeared from across the river, beautiful but distant, parts of a greater whole. As he worked through the night to resolve the situation with the Asian markets, Maxwell found his thoughts repeatedly drifting back to the gallery, to Eleanor's questions about value, to Edward Chen's painting of the bookstore bathed in golden light, to the strange sense of recognition he'd felt standing before it. Something was shifting in him, a questioning of assumptions so fundamental to his identity that he'd never thought to examine them. And somehow, Olivia Barnes seemed to be at the center of this unexpected transformation. Sunday afternoon couldn't come soon enough. Sunday afternoon found Maxwell standing outside a stately brownstone in Harlem, checking the address Olivia had texted him against the number on the building. The neighborhood had changed significantly. In recent years, gentrification, bringing upscale restaurants and boutiques, alongside the historic institutions that had defined Harlem for generations. Maxwell had dressed casually at Olivia's suggestion, dark jeans and a simple sweater rather than his usual weekend attire of tailored slacks and button-downs. He felt oddly vulnerable, without his usual armor of expensive clothing, as if he were somehow more exposed. Before he could ring the bell, the door opened, revealing Olivia in a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Right on time," she said with a smile. "Come in." The interior of the brownstone was warm and inviting. Hardwood floors, walls painted in rich, earthy colors, and an eclectic mix of furniture that somehow worked harmoniously together. Black and white photographs lined the stairwell, capturing moments from Harlem's storied past. "Is this your home?" Maxwell asked, taking in the surroundings. "No, it belongs to Marcus from the dinner party. He runs the Harlem Cultural Heritage Project from here, so it's both a residence and a community space." As if on cue, Marcus appeared from a room at the back of the house. He greeted Maxwell warmly, as though they were old friends rather than mere acquaintances. "Glad you could join us today," Marcus said, leading them into a spacious room that appeared to be a combination of living area and informal exhibition space. Shelves lined the walls filled with books, photographs, and artifacts. Tables displayed what looked like historical documents, protected in clear preservation sleeves. "What is this place exactly?" Maxwell asked, taking in the unusual space. "We call it the Memory Room," Marcus explained. "It's where we collect, preserve, and share the histories of families who have lived in Harlem through the decades. Some have been here for generations. Others passed through during the Great Migration, or more recent waves of movement." Maxwell moved closer to examine some of the displayed items. There were old photographs of families standing proudly in front of businesses or homes, letters written in careful penmanship, newspaper clippings documenting community events, and everyday objects that had acquired significance through their connection to personal stories. "This is remarkable," Maxwell said honestly. A living archive. That's exactly what it is, Marcus nodded, pleased by Maxwell's understanding. History isn't just in museums and textbooks. It's in family stories, in the objects passed down through generations, in the memories people carry. Marcus has been collecting these histories for over 15 years, Olivia added. The project has preserved stories that might otherwise have been lost to time or displacement. As neighborhoods change, histories get erased, Marcus explained. When a family moves because they can no longer afford rising rents, they take their stories with them. Sometimes those stories get scattered, forgotten. We try to keep them intact, connected to the place where they happened. The subtle reference to gentrification, a process Maxwell's development companies had often accelerated, wasn't lost on him. Yet there was no accusation in Marcus's tone, just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement of reality. "Why did you want me to see this?" Maxwell asked Olivia directly. "Because I think it might help answer some of the questions you've been asking yourself," she replied. About belonging, about value beyond the monetary. Before Maxwell could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of an elderly woman who entered from the kitchen area. She was petite but carried herself with dignity, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her dark eyes sharp and intelligent. "Ah, Mrs. Johnson, perfect timing," Marcus said warmly. "I'd like you to meet our guest, Maxwell Reed. Maxwell, this is Eleanor Johnson, one of our community elders and a magnificent keeper of stories." "A pleasure to meet you." "A young man," Mrs. Johnson said, extending a hand that Maxwell shook gently. "Any friend of Marcus and Olivia is welcome here." "Mrs. Johnson has lived in Harlem for 83 years, Marcus explained. "She's seen this neighborhood through multiple transformations. Born and raised right on 138th Street, Mrs. Johnson confirmed with pride. Watched Harlem rise and fall and rise again. Mrs. Johnson has been helping us with a particular collection we recently acquired," Olivia explained, exchanging a meaningful glance with Marcus. "That's actually why we wanted you to come today." Maxwell's curiosity was piqued. "What collection is that?" Marcus led them to a table at the far end of the room, where several archival boxes were arranged. "A few months ago, we were contacted by a family who was relocating after selling their brownstone. They had discovered a collection of items in the attic, materials that had belonged to previous owners of the house from the 1950s and 60s. He opened one of the boxes and carefully removed a leather-bound album. The items belonged to a family named Reed. Maxwell felt a strange tightness in his chest. "Reed?" "Yes," Marcus confirmed, watching Maxwell's reaction closely. "Thomas and Eliza Reed and their son William. The same names Maxwell had seen in the family Bible at the Bronx Heritage Center. This couldn't be coincidence. "May I?" Maxwell asked, indicating the album. Marcus handed it to him carefully. "Of course." Maxwell opened the album with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside were photographs. A handsome black man in his 30s, standing proudly in front of a small shop with a sign reading Reed's Pharmacy. The same man with a light-skinned woman who must have been Eliza, their arms around each other. And later, pictures of a small boy who appeared to be their son. "Thomas Reed was a pharmacist," Mrs. Johnson said, coming to stand beside Maxwell. "One of the first black pharmacists in the neighborhood. His wife Eliza was a teacher. They were prominent members of the community, always helping others, supporting the civil rights movement, encouraging education." Maxwell turned the pages slowly, absorbing the images of this family who shared his surname. The boy William appeared in school photos, graduation pictures, and finally as a young man in a military uniform. "What happened to them?" Maxwell asked, his voice unnaturally tight. "Thomas passed in 1972, Mrs. Johnson answered. "Heart attack. Eliza lived until the early 90s. Their son, William—" She hesitated, glancing at Marcus. "William Reed left Harlem after serving in Vietnam," Marcus continued carefully. "According to community records, he moved to Connecticut in the mid-1970s. The trail goes somewhat cold after that." Connecticut. Maxwell's stomach clenched. "We believe William Reed may have changed his name," Olivia said softly. "It wasn't uncommon in that era for people of color who could pass as white to do so, particularly when moving to predominantly white communities." Maxwell closed the album, his mind racing. "Why are you showing me this?" And the room fell silent. Marcus and Mrs. Johnson exchanged glances, clearly sensing the tension. "Perhaps Mrs. Johnson could show us the other materials from the collection," Olivia suggested smoothly. I believe there were some letters. While Mrs. Johnson retrieved another box, Maxwell pulled Olivia aside. What exactly are you implying? He asked in a low voice. I'm not implying anything, Maxwell, she replied calmly. I'm showing you a family history that may have relevance to your own. Based on a shared surname? Reed is hardly uncommon. Is it just the surname? Olivia asked quietly. Or is it the Connecticut connection too? The timing? The fact that you've never spoken about your family history before the 1980s. Maxwell felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. You've been investigating me. I've been trying to help you find what you've lost, Olivia corrected gently. Isn't that what you asked me about? What I do? This is it. Before Maxwell could respond, Mrs. Johnson returned with a box containing carefully preserved letters. These are Thomas and Eliza's correspondence, she explained. Some of it is quite personal, but Marcus thought you might find it valuable to read them. Maxwell hesitated, then accepted the first letter Mrs. Johnson offered. It was dated 1965, written from Thomas to Eliza while she was visiting family in Georgia. The handwriting was neat, precise, the script of a well-educated man. The content was ordinary. Updates about the pharmacy, neighborhood news, expressions of love for his wife. Yet something about it tugged at Maxwell's memory. The handwriting. It was eerily similar to his father's, William Reed's, handwriting that Maxwell remembered from childhood. The same distinctive way of forming capital letters, the same slight rightward slant. Maxwell set the letter down carefully, his hands not quite steady. Would you like some tea? Mrs. Johnson asked, her perceptive eyes noticing his discomfort. I just made a fresh pot. Yes, Maxwell managed. Thank you. While Mrs. Johnson went to fetch the tea, Marcus excused himself to take a phone call, leaving Maxwell and Olivia alone with the collection. How long have you known? Maxwell asked, his voice low and controlled. Suspected, not known, Olivia corrected. Since I first heard the full story of your background, or rather the careful absence of details about it. The pieces came together gradually. Your reaction to the family Bible at the Heritage Center, certain similarities in appearance between you and the photographs of Thomas. And you didn't think to discuss this with me privately before bringing me here. Would you have come if I had? Olivia asked. Or would you have dismissed it, avoided it, as you've apparently been doing for years? Maxwell had no answer for that. The truth was he probably would have refused to engage with the possibility, would have shut down any conversation about his family history. How much does Marcus know? He asked instead. Only that you might have a connection to the Reed family. He doesn't know the specifics of your background or your father's choices. Mrs. Johnson returned with a tray of tea things, a simple ceramic pot, mismatched cups that had clearly been collected over years rather than purchased as a set. She poured for them all, then sat in a nearby armchair. Young man, she said directly to Maxwell, I knew Thomas and Eliza Reed. They were good people, principled, hard-working, committed to their community. Whatever you're feeling right now, know that you would have had every reason to be proud of them. Maxwell looked up, meeting her knowing gaze. You figured it out too, she nodded. I suspected when Marcus first mentioned your name. There's a resemblance around the eyes to Thomas. Then seeing your reaction to the photographs confirmed it. William was their only child. My father never spoke of his parents, Maxwell said quietly. He created a different history for himself. Old Connecticut family, private schools, a background that would never be questioned in the finance world he entered. And you? Mrs. Johnson asked gently. Did you know? Maxwell stared into his tea. There were hints, things that didn't quite add up. A lack of extended family. No old photographs before a certain date. Contradictions in stories. But it was never discussed. He looked up at Olivia. How did you connect these specific Reeds to me? The Connecticut move was the first clue, she explained. Then finding records of a William Reed, who disappeared from Harlem around the same time. A William Reed appeared in Connecticut records, but with different racial classification. I found an old yearbook photo from William's high school days and compared it to the earliest photos of your father, available in news archives from his early banking career. The resemblance was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. So my father was born William Reed, son of a black pharmacist and his wife in Harlem, Maxwell said slowly, as if testing the reality of this new narrative. He served in Vietnam, then moved to Connecticut in the mid-70s and reinvented himself. Passed as white, married my mother, became the man I knew. It wasn't uncommon, Mrs. Johnson said without judgment. Those were difficult times. People made hard choices for many reasons. Why didn't Eliza maintain contact with her son? Maxwell asked. If she lived until the 90s, that we don't know, Marcus said, returning to the room. From community memories, Eliza was deeply hurt by William's decision to cut ties with Harlem. She rarely spoke of him in her later years. Maxwell sat in silence, absorbing this revelation about his family history. All his life, he had operated under one understanding of his identity and place in the world. Now that foundation had shifted beneath him. There's something else you should see, Marcus said after a moment. He retrieved a small box from one of the archival containers and opened it carefully. Inside was a pocket watch, tarnished with age but still elegant. This belonged to Thomas Reed. According to community records, it was a gift from his customers when he opened the pharmacy in 1948. Maxwell took the watch with reverent care. Opening it, he found an inscription, "To Thomas Reed, healer, leader, friend from your grateful community." The watch was meant to be passed down to William, Mrs. Johnson explained, a family legacy. But when William left, Maxwell closed the watch and returned it to its box. "Thank you for showing me this." The conversation shifted to other aspects of Thomas and Eliza's lives, their involvement in community organizations, Thomas's role in providing affordable medications to those in need, Eliza's dedication to her students. Maxwell listened intently, trying to reconcile this new lineage with the carefully crafted narrative he had grown up with. After some time, Mrs. Johnson excused herself, patting Maxwell's hand gently before leaving. "Family is complicated, young man, but knowing your true roots can be a strength, not a burden." Once she had gone, Marcus showed Maxwell additional materials from the collection, business records from the pharmacy, community newsletters mentioning the Reeds, photographs of neighborhood events where they had been present. "We're working to digitize all of these materials," Marcus explained, "to make them accessible to researchers, community members, and family descendants." "Family descendants," Maxwell repeated quietly. "That would include me." "If you are indeed William's son, yes," Marcus confirmed. "Would you be willing to provide any information you have about William's life after leaving Harlem? It would help complete the record." Maxwell hesitated. "I need time to process this, to reconcile everything." "Of course," Marcus nodded, understanding. "Take whatever time you need, and know that this information remains private unless you choose to acknowledge it publicly." "I appreciate that," Maxwell said sincerely. Eventually, Marcus excused himself to attend to other visitors who had arrived at the brownstone, leaving Maxwell and Olivia alone with the Reed family collection. "Why did you do this?" Maxwell asked finally, his voice controlled but tense. "Why unearth a history my father clearly wanted buried?" "Because you've been searching for something," Olivia replied quietly. "A sense of authenticity, of genuine connection that's been missing in your life. I believe understanding your true history might help you find it. By revealing that my entire identity is built on a lie, that the prestigious background I've claimed, that helped open doors in an elite world, is a fiction? No," Olivia shook her head. "By showing you that you come from people of principle and courage, that your grandfather was a respected community leader who helped others, that your roots are deeper and more meaningful than the shallow story you've been told." Maxwell stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Harlem street below. Sunday afternoon unfolded in ordinary rhythms, people walking dogs, children playing, neighbors chatting on stoops. This could have been his father's view as a child. "All these years," he said, more to himself than to Olivia, "I've been trying to prove I belonged in rooms where old money and privilege rule, fighting to be accepted in circles that would have rejected my grandfather without a second thought. And now," Olivia asked, coming to stand beside him, "now I don't know what to think." He turned to face her. "Did my father ever intend to tell me the truth? Was my mother aware? Did they think they were protecting me or themselves? Those are questions only you can explore," Olivia said gently. "But perhaps understanding your father's choices might help you understand your own. My own choices. The drive to achieve, to accumulate wealth and status, to constantly prove yourself. Might those impulses be connected to a deeper insecurity, one rooted in a hidden identity? Maxwell had never considered this possibility, that his relentless ambition might be connected to his father's secret, to a subconscious awareness of precarity beneath the facade of belonging. "I need some air," he said abruptly. Olivia nodded. Of course. They said their goodbyes to Marcus, who invited Maxwell to return whenever he was ready to learn more. Outside on the brownstone steps, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. "Would you like me to leave you alone?" Olivia asked, sensing his need for space. "No," Maxwell replied, surprising himself with the answer. "Actually, I could use a walk. And some company." They strolled through Harlem in companionable silence, Maxwell processing the revelations of the afternoon, Olivia respecting his need to think. Eventually, they reached a small park where they found an empty bench. "I keep thinking about what my father must have felt," Maxwell said finally. "The pressure of maintaining that facade, the fear of discovery. It must have been exhausting." "It likely was," Olivia agreed. Passing wasn't just about convenience. It was often about survival in a deeply prejudiced society. But to cut ties completely with his parents, his community— "We don't know the full story," Olivia reminded him gently. "Family estrangements happen for many complex reasons." Maxwell nodded, then asked the question that had been forming since they left the brownstone. "Did you orchestrate all of this from the beginning? Our meeting, the dinner party, the community garden, the gallery. Was it all leading to this revelation?" Olivia considered his question carefully. "Not in the calculated way you might be thinking. I've been working with Marcus on the Reed collection for months as part of my volunteer work. When I encountered you at that business meeting and learned your name, I was intrigued by the possibility of a connection. Each step since then has been guided by what seemed right in the moment, creating opportunities for you to see different perspectives, different values." "Why me, though? Why invest this much effort in a stranger?" "Because I recognized something in you that first day, a disconnection between your external success and your internal satisfaction. The same disconnection I've seen in others who have lost touch with their authentic selves." She met his gaze directly. "And because I believe understanding your true history might help you reconnect with what matters." Maxwell was silent for a long moment, absorbing her words. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted finally. "The narrative I've lived by feels hollow now." "Or perhaps you're just beginning to discover who you truly are," Olivia suggested. "Not defined by wealth or status or a fabricated lineage, but by choices you make with full awareness of your complete history." As the sun began to set, casting a golden light across the park, Maxwell made a decision. "I want to see the pharmacy where it stood. Is the building still there?" "I believe so, though it's a different business now." "We can find it." Using her phone's map, Olivia located the address from the old photographs. They walked several blocks until they reached a corner building that now housed a local bakery. The architecture remained largely unchanged from the images Maxwell had seen. The same bay window, the same recessed entrance, though the signage and interior were completely different. Maxwell stood across the street, staring at the building where his grandfather had worked, where his father had likely spent time as a child. A connection to a past he had never known existed until today. "Thomas Reed filled prescriptions there for over 20 years, Olivia said quietly. "According to the community histories, he sometimes provided medications at reduced cost to those who couldn't afford them. He was known for his generosity and discretion." "A healer, leader, friend," Maxwell repeated the words from the pocket watch inscription. "While I've built a career on acquisitions and profit margins." "Different times, different choices," Olivia said without judgment. "But perhaps not entirely different values if you look deeper. Your philanthropy has funded healthcare initiatives, educational opportunities. Tax write-offs and PR," Maxwell dismissed. "Not the same as what he did." "Maybe not yet," Olivia acknowledged. "But understanding your true history gives you a chance to align your present actions with a legacy you can genuinely honor." As darkness fell over the city, Maxwell took one last look at the building before they turned to leave. Something had shifted fundamentally within him, a revelation that couldn't be undone, a truth that demanded acknowledgement. "What happens now?" he asked as they walked back toward the main avenue where he could find a car. "That's entirely up to you," Olivia replied. "This is your history, your truth to process and integrate however feels right. Will you help me?" The request came more easily than Maxwell would have expected, an acknowledgement that he couldn't navigate this alone. Olivia's smile was warm in the gathering dusk. Of course, that's what friends do. Friends. The word settled between them, simple yet profound. Maxwell realized that in all his years of networking, deal-making, and strategic socializing, he had accumulated many associates but few true friends. Olivia, in the span of just weeks, had somehow become one of them. As they parted ways that evening, Maxwell knew with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same. The carefully constructed identity he had inhabited for decades had been irrevocably altered. What would take its place remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, he felt something unexpected stirring within him, possibility. The days following Maxwell's discovery of his true family history passed in a blur. By day, he maintained his usual schedule of meetings and decisions, the practiced facade of Maxwell Reed, financial titan, firmly in place. But his nights were spent poring over the digital copies Marcus had sent of the Reed family archives, photographs, letters, newspaper clippings, and community records that pieced together the lives of people he should have known as his family. Thomas Reed emerged from these documents as a man of principle and quiet dignity. The pharmacy he had built served as both a business and a community cornerstone. Articles from local newspapers quoted him on healthcare access issues. Photographs showed him at civil rights gatherings and neighborhood celebrations. In one particularly moving image, Thomas stood proudly beside a young black doctor he had mentored, who had returned to Harlem to open a clinic. Eliza Reed appeared equally remarkable, a teacher who had fought for better resources in Harlem schools, who had organized a community literacy program, who had been remembered in her obituary as a woman who believed knowledge was the truest path to freedom. And then there was William, Maxwell's father. The proud boy in the photographs, standing beside his father at the pharmacy or receiving academic awards, gave no hint of the man who would eventually erase this heritage and create an entirely different identity for himself. The revelation had left Maxwell with questions that haunted him. What had driven his father to make such a radical break? Had it been purely pragmatic, the calculation that passing as white would open doors in the finance world of the 1970s? Or had there been some deeper rift, some unresolved conflict with his parents? Most troubling was the question of his mother's knowledge. Had she been complicit in the deception? Had she known she was marrying a man who had reinvented himself, who had severed ties with his family and community? Maxwell's relationship with his mother had grown distant over years of perfunctory holiday visits and occasional phone calls, but this new reality demanded a confrontation he had never anticipated. On Thursday morning, Maxwell made a decision. He cancelled his appointments for the following day and instructed his assistant to book him on a flight to Phoenix, where his mother had retired 5 years earlier following her divorce from her second husband. That evening, as he packed an overnight bag, Maxwell's phone rang. Olivia's name appeared on the screen. "I was just thinking about you," he said by way of greeting. "Good thoughts." "I hope," she replied, her voice warm through the connection. "Complicated ones." Maxwell moved to the window of his penthouse, looking out at the city lights. "I'm flying to Phoenix tomorrow to see my mother. You're going to ask her about your father?" "Yes, I need to know what she knew, when she knew it, whether she was part of constructing the fiction I've lived with all my life." "That's a courageous step," Olivia said. "How are you feeling about it?" Maxwell considered the question. Angry, confused, but also determined. "I've built my entire life on a foundation that turns out to be false. I need to understand why." "The foundation isn't entirely false," Olivia pointed out gently. "Your achievements, your capabilities, those are real. But the narrative that drove them, the identity I thought I was inhabiting, that was built on a lie, or perhaps on a partial truth. We all construct narratives about ourselves, Maxwell. Some parts we emphasize, others we minimize or conceal. This was more than minimizing," Maxwell countered. "This was erasure." "Yes," Olivia acknowledged, "and understanding why might help you find your way forward." After a moment's hesitation, Maxwell asked, "Would you have dinner with me when I return?" "Sunday evening? I'd like that," Olivia replied. "Text me when you're back in the city." The next morning, Maxwell boarded a flight to Phoenix. As the plane rose above Manhattan, he found himself thinking about the city differently. not just as the arena of his financial conquests, but as the place where his family had once built a life, contributed to a community, left a legacy he had never known. His mother lived in an upscale retirement community in Scottsdale, a carefully landscaped oasis of adobe-style homes surrounding a golf course. Catherine Reed had always prioritized appearances, and her retirement home was no exception, tastefully decorated in southwestern elegance, immaculately maintained, designed to impress. She seemed surprised but pleased to see Maxwell when she opened the door, her carefully preserved beauty at 68, a testament to both genetics and discreet cosmetic interventions. Maxwell. What an unexpected surprise. She embraced him with the practiced affection that had characterized their relationship for years. You should have called ahead. I would have prepared something special. It was a last-minute decision, Maxwell explained, following her into the living room where large windows overlooked a manicured desert landscape. I needed to speak with you about something important. Catherine's smile faltered slightly. Nothing wrong with your health, I hope. No, nothing like that. Maxwell declined her offer of a drink, watching as she poured herself a glass of white wine. I've learned something recently about Dad, about his family background. The subtle stiffening of his mother's shoulders told Maxwell everything. She knew. What do you mean? She asked, her voice carefully controlled as she took a seat opposite him. I know that Dad was born William Reed in Harlem, that his parents were Thomas and Eliza Reed, that he changed his identity when he moved to Connecticut. Maxwell held his mother's gaze, that he erased his black heritage to pass as white. The color drained from Catherine's face. She set her wineglass down with a hand that trembled slightly. How did you find out? That's not important right now, Maxwell replied. What matters is whether you knew, and why neither of you ever told me the truth. Catherine was silent for a long moment, her eyes focused on some middle distance, as if seeing into the past. Yes, I knew, she admitted finally. Not at first. We met at a banking conference in Boston. He was so charming, so ambitious. By the time I learned about his background, we were already engaged. And you went through with the marriage anyway. It was 1976, Maxwell. Times were different. Different how? He pressed. Catherine sighed. My family would never have accepted him if they'd known. My father was traditional in his views. The firm where your father worked would likely have found a reason to let him go. The social circles we moved in would have excluded us. She looked at her son directly. We made a decision to protect our future, and eventually yours. By living a lie. By creating a life where doors would be open to you, she countered, where you wouldn't face the prejudice your father had experienced. Did he tell you about that? About what he experienced growing up? Catherine shook her head. William rarely spoke about his past. When he did, it was carefully edited. I gathered that his relationship with his parents had become strained, that he wanted a clean break. Did you ever meet them? My grandparents? No, Catherine admitted. They were already out of the picture when we met. Maxwell absorbed this, feeling the weight of everything that had been kept from him. Did you ever consider telling me the truth? When I was older, when times had changed. His mother's expression grew distant. William was adamant that you should never know. He believed he was protecting you from a complicated legacy. She hesitated. After the divorce, I considered telling you, but it felt like a betrayal of the agreement we'd made, and I wasn't sure how you would take it. How I would take it, Maxwell repeated, or how it would affect the image you'd cultivated, the prestigious family background, the social status you valued so highly. Catherine flinched at his words. That's not fair, Maxwell, isn't it? You've always been concerned with appearances, with status. Would you have been comfortable acknowledging that your ex-husband was a black man who had denied his heritage? That your son was mixed race? Times were different, she repeated weakly. Times changed, Mother. But the lie continued. They sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. Outside the large windows, the desert landscape shimmered in the afternoon heat. Beautiful but harsh, unforgiving. Did Dad ever express regret? Maxwell asked finally. About cutting ties with his family, his community. Catherine considered the question. Not explicitly, but there were moments. He would sometimes get melancholy around the holidays. Once, when we were in the city, he insisted on driving through Harlem. He didn't say why, just that he needed to see something. He came back to the hotel looking shaken. She took a sip of her wine. After that, he threw himself even more intensely into his work, as if trying to outrun something. His conscience, maybe, Maxwell suggested. Or his grief, Catherine countered softly. I think he genuinely believed he couldn't have both worlds, his Harlem roots and the life he wanted to build. It was a different era, Maxwell. You keep saying that, because it's true. You can't judge the past by present standards. I'm not judging the past, Maxwell said. I'm trying to understand how my entire identity was constructed on a foundation of denial. How the achievements I've prided myself on were built partly on a privilege obtained through deception. Catherine's expression hardened slightly. You've worked hard for everything you've achieved, Maxwell. Your father's choices don't diminish that, don't they? How much easier was my path because I was perceived as white? Because I had access to elite spaces without question? Because I could claim a heritage that opened doors? You can't rewrite history, his mother said firmly. What's done is done. That's where you're wrong, Maxwell replied, standing up. I can't change the past, but I can certainly rewrite my understanding of it and my path going forward. They talked for hours more about William Reed's career, his careful construction of a WASP identity, his refusal to discuss his past even with his wife. Catherine shared what little she knew about Thomas and Eliza, pieced together from rare, unguarded moments when her husband had mentioned his childhood. By the time Maxwell prepared to leave the next morning, he had a clearer picture of his father, a brilliant, driven man haunted by the choice he had made to sever himself from his roots. His man who had achieved material success, but at a cost neither he nor his family had fully reckoned with. What will you do with this information? Catherine asked as she walked him to his rental car. Her question contained a note of anxiety, concern for the carefully maintained image they had all inhabited for decades. I don't know yet, Maxwell answered honestly. But I can't pretend I don't know the truth anymore. The flight back to New York gave Maxwell time to reflect on everything he had learned. His mother's revelations had filled in some blanks, but had also created new questions. What would his life have been like? Had he known his true heritage from the beginning? Would he have made different choices, valued different things? Most pressing was the question of what to do now. His identity, as he had understood it for 45 years, had been fundamentally altered. The narrative he had constructed about himself, successful scion of a privileged background who had enhanced that legacy through his financial acumen, could no longer stand unchallenged. Sunday evening found Maxwell waiting at a quiet restaurant in the West Village. He had chosen the place carefully, intimate without being pretentious, excellent food without the scene-making atmosphere of his usual haunts. A place for honest conversation. Olivia arrived precisely on time, dressed simply but elegantly in a deep green dress that complemented her eyes. Maxwell rose to greet her, surprised by how genuinely pleased he was to see her after the emotional turbulence of the past few days. You look tired, she observed as they settled at their table. It's been an intense weekend, Maxwell acknowledged, but necessary. Over appetizers, Maxwell recounted his conversation with his mother, her confirmation that she had known about William's true background, her rationalizations about the times they lived in, her inability to see how the deception had shaped Maxwell's entire understanding of himself. She still doesn't fully grasp what this means for me, Maxwell concluded. She thinks it's a historical footnote, not a fundamental revision of my identity. And what does it mean for you? Olivia asked, her question gentle but direct. Maxwell considered this as their entrees arrived. I'm still processing that. On one level, nothing has changed. I'm still the same person with the same capabilities, the same history of decisions. But on another level, everything has shifted. The context for those decisions, the privileges that facilitated them, the very foundation of how I've understood myself in the world. It's a lot to integrate, Olivia acknowledged. Be patient with yourself. The irony is that I've spent my entire career assessing value, making judgments about worth, determining what matters in financial terms, Maxwell said. And now I'm confronted with questions of value and worth that have nothing to do with balance sheets or market projections. Perhaps that's the gift in this discovery, Olivia suggested. The invitation to expand your understanding of value beyond the metrics you've relied on. They talked through dinner, Maxwell finding in Olivia a thoughtful listener who neither dismissed his struggle nor offered facile solutions. She asked questions that helped him clarify his own thinking, shared perspectives that opened new angles of consideration. "There's something I haven't told you," Maxwell said as they lingered over coffee. "Before I left for Phoenix, I instructed my foundation director to research grant possibilities for the Harlem Cultural Heritage Project. I want to establish an endowment that would secure its future." Olivia's eyes widened slightly. "That's a significant step. It's the least I can do. My grandfather dedicated his life to that community. The least his grandson can do is help preserve its history. Have you told Marcus yet?" Maxwell shook his head. "I wanted to be sure the legalities could be worked out first. The foundation typically focuses on different causes. He'll be deeply grateful," Olivia said. "The project operates on a shoestring budget." "There's more," Maxwell continued. "I've been thinking about the old pharmacy building. It's currently owned by a holding company that's part of a larger real estate portfolio my firm acquired years ago. I'm exploring the possibility of establishing a community health center there, something that would honor Thomas Reed's legacy while serving practical needs." Olivia reached across the table and squeezed his hand, a gesture of support that felt more meaningful than words. "These are beautiful ways to reconnect with your heritage, Maxwell." "They're just first steps," he acknowledged. "I have a lot more thinking to do about what this means for my life going forward, for the stories I tell about myself, for the values I prioritize." As they left the restaurant, the spring evening was pleasantly cool. They walked together without any particular destination, their conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Maxwell said as they paused at a small neighborhood park. "How did you get involved in this work, helping people reconnect with forgotten aspects of themselves?" Olivia was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "My mother's illness changed everything for me. I had been working in academic anthropology, researching cultural memory and identity. When she was diagnosed with cancer, I took a leave to care for her. That must have been difficult." "It was, but also profound." Olivia's expression softened at the memory. "During those months, she shared family stories I'd never heard, connected me with relatives I barely knew, helped me understand our history in ways that transformed my sense of self. After she passed, I couldn't go back to studying these processes academically. I needed to engage with them directly, to help others experience the power of reclaiming their complete narratives." "So you became a personal consultant," Maxwell said, recalling the vague professional description from her background check. Olivia smiled. Her deliberately ambiguous title. "What I really do is help people find their way back to authenticity, whether that means reconnecting with family histories, rediscovering abandoned passions, or recognizing values they've compromised along the way." "And you sought me out specifically?" "Not exactly. Our meeting at that initial business presentation was genuinely coincidental. But once I recognized your name and saw hints of something unresolved beneath your successful exterior, I became professionally curious." "You took quite a risk," Maxwell pointed out. "I could have reacted very differently to all this." "True," Olivia acknowledged. "But I sensed you were ready for this reckoning, even if you didn't know it yet." They continued walking, eventually circling back toward the restaurant where Maxwell had valeted his car. The city hummed around them, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, each with its own complex truths and hidden histories. "What happens now?" Maxwell asked as they reached his car. "That's entirely up to you," Olivia replied. "My role was to help you discover what you'd lost touch with. What you do with that discovery is your journey." Maxwell studied her in the gentle glow of the streetlights. "And what about this?" He gestured between them. "Us." Olivia met his gaze directly. "That's a separate question. I didn't seek you out for personal reasons, Maxwell. But I won't deny that I've come to care about you beyond any professional interest." "I'd like to see where this might lead," Maxwell said. "Not as part of some guided self-discovery process, but as two people who have connected in unexpected ways." "I'd like that too," Olivia replied simply. "But I think we both need clarity about where my professional role ends and where whatever this is between us begins." "Agreed," Maxwell said. "So consider this my formal acknowledgement that your professional services are no longer required. I'll take responsibility for my own reckoning from here on out." Olivia laughed, the sound bright in the quiet street. "Very officially noted." "In that case," Maxwell said, stepping closer to her, "would it be all right if I kissed you? As two people with no professional relationship whatsoever." Instead of answering, Olivia closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning, the conclusion of one chapter and the opening of another. When they parted, Maxwell felt a clarity that had been missing for longer than he could remember. Whatever came next would be complicated, challenging, perhaps even painful at times. Integrating his newly discovered heritage, reconsidering his values and priorities, possibly even making public what his father had so carefully concealed, none of it would be simple. But for the first time in years, Maxwell Reed felt fully present in his own life, engaging with questions that mattered beyond balance sheets and acquisitions. And he wasn't facing those questions alone. "I should go," Olivia said softly. "You have a lot to process." Maxwell nodded. "Can I see you tomorrow?" "I'd like that." As he watched her walk toward the subway entrance, Maxwell thought about the unexpected journey of the past few weeks. What had begun as a chance encounter had led to a fundamental reconsideration of everything he had believed about himself and his place in the world. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new reckonings. For tonight, Maxwell was content with the knowledge that he had begun the process of reconciling who he had thought he was with who he might yet become. The following weeks brought changes to Maxwell's life that would have seemed inconceivable just months earlier. Externally, he maintained his position as the formidable head of Reed Ventures, making decisions and directing investments with his usual acumen. But internally, a profound shift was underway as he began to integrate his newly discovered heritage into his understanding of himself. 3 weeks after his visit to Phoenix, Maxwell sat in Marcus's living room in Harlem, finalizing the details of a substantial grant from the Reed Foundation to the Harlem Cultural Heritage Project. The endowment would secure the project's future for decades to come, allowing for expanded preservation efforts, educational programs, and community outreach. "This is transformative," Marcus said, reviewing the documents with barely contained emotion. "We've operated on minimal funding for so long, constantly at risk of losing our space or having to limit our work. This changes everything." "It's the right thing to do," Maxwell replied simply. "Have you given any more thought to making your connection to the Reed family public?" Marcus asked carefully. "I want to respect your privacy, but acknowledging your heritage as part of this grant would add another meaningful dimension to the story." Maxwell had been wrestling with this question since discovering the truth. His instinct for privacy warred with a growing sense that honesty about his background might be an important step in his personal reckoning. "I'm still considering it," he answered. "It's complicated. Not just for me, but potentially for my mother, for business relationships I've built over decades." "I understand," Marcus nodded. "Whatever you decide, this gift honors your grandfather's legacy in a profound way." After leaving Marcus's brownstone, Maxwell walked through the Harlem streets, allowing himself to absorb the neighborhood with new awareness. This was where his father had grown up, where his grandparents had built their lives. The connection he felt to these blocks was no longer abstract. It was personal, familial, a birthright he had only recently discovered. His phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. "Meeting running late. Rain check on dinner? Tomorrow instead?" Maxwell texted back his understanding, surprised by how much he had been looking forward to seeing her. Their relationship had been developing with a deliberate slowness over the past weeks. Dinners, walks through the city, conversations that ranged from deeply personal to playfully trivial. Maxwell found himself revealing aspects of himself he had never shared with anyone, while discovering Olivia's own complex, fascinating layers. Without dinner plans, Maxwell decided to continue exploring Harlem. He found himself drawn to 125th Street, the neighborhood's main commercial thoroughfare. The street pulsed with energy, music streaming from shops, vendors selling everything from incense to books, people of all ages moving with purpose or leisure along the wide sidewalks. Outside the historic Apollo Theater, Maxwell paused to study the images of legendary performers who had graced its stage? Had his grandparents attended shows here? Had his father? These ordinary questions about family history, taken for granted by most, felt like precious discoveries to Maxwell. A small bookstore caught his eye across the street, its window displaying works by Harlem Renaissance authors alongside contemporary black writers. On impulse, Maxwell crossed and entered the shop. The interior was warm and inviting, shelves packed with books on African-American history, culture, literature, and politics. "Looking for anything specific?" asked a young woman behind the counter, her expression friendly but assessing, as she took in Maxwell's obviously expensive casual attire. "Just browsing," Maxwell replied. "Actually, I'm interested in Harlem history, particularly from the 1950s and 60s. The woman, Sarah, according to her name tag, directed him to a section dedicated to local history. Maxwell found himself engrossed in a volume about Harlem's small business owners during that era. To his amazement, there was a brief mention of Reed's Pharmacy, described as a neighborhood institution known for fair prices and community support. "Find something interesting?" Sarah asked, noticing his focused attention. "Yes," Maxwell said, an idea forming. "Do you ever host author events or discussions here?" "When we can afford to," Sarah nodded. "It's challenging as an independent bookstore, but we try to maintain a cultural program." "I'd like to make a donation," Maxwell said, "to support your community programming." Sarah looked surprised but pleased. "That's very generous. May I ask what prompted this interest?" Maxwell hesitated only briefly. "Family connections to the neighborhood, recently discovered." After making arrangements for his donation, Maxwell purchased several books on Harlem history and continued his walk. The interaction had felt significant somehow, a small but meaningful step toward engaging with the community his grandparents had called home. The next evening, Maxwell shared this experience with Olivia as they dined at a quiet restaurant in Brooklyn. "It felt right," he explained. "A small gesture, but something concrete." "Those small gestures matter," Olivia affirmed. "They're how we begin to align our actions with our evolving understanding of ourselves." "I've been thinking more about going public with my heritage," Maxwell admitted. "Not with a press conference or announcement, but simply by acknowledging it when relevant, by integrating it into how I present myself professionally." "What's holding you back?" Olivia asked, her question gentle but direct. Maxwell considered this carefully. "Part of it is concern about how it might affect business relationships. Some of my investors and partners are traditional in their outlooks, but honestly, that feels like a rationalization. The real hesitation is more personal. It means fully accepting that my father built his life, and by extension mine, on a deliberate erasure of his identity. And how do you feel about that now?" "I understand why he felt it necessary, given the times and his ambitions. But I'm increasingly troubled by the cost, not just to him but to me." Maxwell met Olivia's gaze. "I've spent my life believing I needed to prove my worth in terms defined by wealth and status. What if those weren't even the right metrics?" Olivia reached across the table, taking his hand. "That's the real journey you're on now. Not just acknowledging your heritage, but reconsidering what truly constitutes value in your life." The conversation shifted to Olivia's work with other clients, always maintaining confidentiality, but sharing insights about the common struggles people faced in reconnecting with authentic aspects of themselves they had suppressed or forgotten. "Your work is remarkable," Maxwell observed. "How you help people find what they've lost without imposing your own agenda on their discoveries. That's the ideal," Olivia smiled, "though I'm not always perfectly neutral. I do believe that authenticity leads to greater fulfillment than conformity, that genuine connection matters more than status. Those values inevitably shape my approach." "Speaking of connections," Maxwell said, "I'd like you to meet someone important to me. My colleague Richard Thompson has been my right hand at Reed Ventures for 15 years. We're having dinner at my place tomorrow night. Would you join us?" The invitation represented another significant step, introducing Olivia to a key person from his professional life, beginning to bridge the growing compartments of his existence. "I'd like that," Olivia replied. The following evening, Maxwell welcomed Olivia to his penthouse for the first time. He realized as she entered that he had been slightly nervous about her reaction to his home. Would she see it merely as a monument to wealth and status? Olivia took in the spectacular views, the museum-quality art, the meticulous design with appreciative eyes. "Beautiful space," she commented, "though it feels more like a perfectly curated gallery than a home where someone lives." Her observation was perceptive rather than judgmental, and Maxwell found himself nodding in agreement. "I'm rarely here except to sleep," he admitted. "It was designed to impress rather than comfort." "And who was it meant to impress?" Olivia asked. Before Maxwell could answer, the elevator announced another arrival. Richard Thompson stepped into the penthouse, his tall frame impeccably dressed as always, his expression curious as he spotted Olivia. "Richard, I'd like you to meet Olivia Barnes," Maxwell said, performing the introduction. "Olivia, this is Richard Thompson, Executive Vice President of Reed Ventures and my most trusted advisor." Richard shook Olivia's hand with a practiced smile. "A pleasure to meet you." Maxwell has been unusually mysterious about his recent social engagements. Dinner, prepared by Maxwell's personal chef, was served in the formal dining room overlooking Central Park. The conversation initially focused on safe topics, current events, the city's latest cultural offerings, mutual observations about the financial markets. As the main course was served, Richard turned to Olivia with polite interest. "Maxwell mentioned you work as a consultant, Ms. Barnes. What field, if I may ask?" "I help people reconnect with aspects of themselves they've lost touch with," Olivia replied simply. "Often that involves exploring family histories, abandoned passions, or values that have been compromised along the way." Richard raised an eyebrow. "That sounds alternative. How did you and Maxwell connect?" Maxwell answered before Olivia could. "Olivia has helped me discover something significant about my family background, Richard. Something I've decided to share with you, given your importance to Reed Ventures and to me personally." Richard's expression shifted from polite curiosity to focused attention. "That sounds serious." Over the next half hour, Maxwell explained the recent revelations about his father's true identity and heritage. Richard listened without interruption, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes registering increasing surprise. "So your father was born William Reed, son of a black pharmacist and his wife in Harlem," Richard summarized when Maxwell finished. "He chose to pass as white when he moved to Connecticut, essentially creating a new identity for himself." "Yes," Maxwell confirmed. "Which means I am biracial, though I was raised without any knowledge or connection to my black heritage." Richard was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "May I ask why you're telling me this now?" "Because I'm considering acknowledging it publicly," Maxwell replied. "Not with any grand announcement, but simply by incorporating it into my biography, by engaging with related causes and communities in a more personal way." Richard's business instincts immediately engaged. "That would be a significant shift in your public narrative. Have you considered the potential implications for Reed Ventures? For investor relations? For the public perception you've carefully cultivated?" "I've begun to," Maxwell acknowledged. "But I'm increasingly convinced that living authentically matters more than managing perceptions." Richard glanced at Olivia, then back to Maxwell. "That doesn't sound like the Maxwell Reed I've known for 15 years. "No offense," he added quickly to Olivia. "None taken," she replied calmly. "People evolve, particularly when confronted with new truths about themselves." "May I speak frankly?" Richard asked Maxwell, who nodded. "This revelation doesn't change who you are or what you've accomplished, but making it public could create unnecessary complications for the firm. Some of our more conservative investors might have reactions. If they do, that's valuable information about who we're doing business with," Maxwell replied. Richard studied him with growing concern. "This isn't just about heritage, is it? You're reconsidering other aspects of how you operate." "I'm questioning values I've taken for granted," Maxwell confirmed. "The single-minded focus on wealth accumulation and status that has driven most of my decisions." "Those values built a multi-billion-dollar enterprise," Richard pointed out. "At what cost?" Maxwell countered. "To relationships, to community engagement, to a sense of purpose beyond the next acquisition." The conversation continued through dessert and coffee, becoming increasingly philosophical. Richard, while clearly unsettled by the direction of Maxwell's thinking, engaged thoughtfully with the discussion. Olivia contributed occasionally, but largely allowed the two colleagues to explore the implications of Maxwell's evolving perspective. When Richard departed later that evening, he embraced Maxwell with genuine affection. "Whatever you decide, I've got your back," he said quietly. "Just don't make any announcements without running them by PR first." After he left, Maxwell and Olivia moved to the living room, settling on the sleek sofa that offered breathtaking nighttime views of the city. "That went better than I expected," Maxwell reflected. "He cares about you," Olivia observed, "beyond the business relationship." That was evident. "Richard has been more than a colleague. In many ways, he's been the closest thing to family in my daily life." Maxwell turned to her. "What did you think of him?" "Intelligent, loyal, pragmatic. He's genuinely concerned about how these changes might affect you. And you? Are you concerned?" Olivia considered the question carefully. "Not concerned, but mindful that integration is a process, not an event. Acknowledging your heritage publicly is just one step in a longer journey of aligning your life with this new understanding of yourself." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights twinkling below them. Maxwell found himself studying Olivia's profile, struck by how quickly she had become essential to his life. "I've been thinking about the pharmacy building," he said eventually. "The idea of establishing a health center there feels right, but I want to do it in a way that genuinely serves the community, rather than imposing an outside vision." "Have you considered forming an advisory board of local residents and healthcare providers?" Olivia suggested. "Let them help shape the project." "That's exactly what I want to do," Maxwell nodded. "In fact, I've scheduled a meeting with community leaders next week to begin those conversations. I'd like you to be there if you're willing." "Of course," Olivia agreed, "though my role would be as a supporter, not a leader. This is about your reconnection with your heritage and the community's needs." As the evening grew late, Maxwell walked Olivia to the elevator. Before she left, he took her hands in his. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For helping me find what I didn't even know I'd lost. For seeing something in me worth exploring beneath the successful exterior. For being patient with this journey I'm on." Olivia's smile was warm in the dimmed light of the foyer. "The journey is just beginning, Maxwell, and I'm finding that I'm quite interested in seeing where it leads, for both of us." Their kiss goodnight felt like a promise of deepening connection, of shared exploration, of possibilities neither had anticipated when they first met. The following week brought Maxwell back to Harlem, this time for a formal meeting with community leaders at a local community center. Marcus had helped arrange the gathering, inviting healthcare providers, neighborhood association representatives, educators, and business owners to discuss the potential redevelopment of the old pharmacy building. Maxwell had prepared thoroughly, reviewing community health needs assessments, studying successful models of community-based healthcare delivery, and developing a preliminary proposal that emphasized local hiring, culturally responsive care, and integrated services. As he presented his vision to the assembled group, Maxwell felt a nervous energy he rarely experienced in business settings. These weren't investors to be impressed or competitors to be outmaneuvered. These were people whose lives would be directly affected by his decisions, whose community had once included his own family. "Before we discuss specifics," Maxwell said, concluding his presentation, "I want to share something personal. My interest in this project goes beyond philanthropy or real estate development. Thomas Reed, who owned and operated the pharmacy that once occupied this building, was my grandfather." A murmur of surprise moved through the room. Maxwell continued, "My father was William Reed, who left Harlem in the 1970s. He chose to pass as white when he established himself in Connecticut. As a result, I grew up without knowledge of my heritage or connection to this community. I've only recently discovered this history, and with it a desire to reconnect in meaningful ways." The honesty of this disclosure changed the energy in the room. What might have been viewed as an outsider's project was transformed into something more complex, a descendant's attempt to honor his roots while contributing to the community's future. "I don't expect this personal connection to override any concerns about the project itself," Maxwell added. "In fact, I'm here primarily to listen to your perspectives on what would best serve the neighborhood's healthcare needs." What followed was one of the most engaging discussions Maxwell had ever participated in. Community members spoke candidly about gaps in local healthcare services, barriers to access, cultural disconnects with existing providers, and visions for what comprehensive community care could look like. Dr. Angela Williams, a physician who had grown up in the neighborhood and returned to practice there after medical school, offered particularly valuable insights. "What we need isn't just another clinic," she explained, "but an integrated center that addresses multiple determinants of health: nutrition education, mental health support, preventive care, chronic disease management, and community wellness programming." "That aligns perfectly with what I had envisioned," Maxwell responded, "but I want this to be shaped by those who understand the community best. Would you be willing to serve on an advisory committee to help develop the specifics?" By the end of the meeting, a core advisory group had been formed with Dr. Williams as chair. Plans were made for community listening sessions, needs assessments, and collaborative design processes. Maxwell had made it clear that while he would provide the funding and facilitate the development, the center's mission and programs would be community-driven. As people began to leave, an elderly man approached Maxwell. "I knew your grandfather," he said, extending a weathered hand. "I was just a boy then, but I remember him well. Thomas Reed was a good man. Helped my mother get medicine for my sister when we couldn't afford it. Never made us feel like charity cases either." Maxwell shook the man's hand, deeply moved. "Thank you for sharing that. I'm just beginning to learn who he was." He would be proud of this, the man said, gesturing to the plans for the health center that had been displayed. Coming back to finish what he started. Those words stayed with Maxwell as he left the meeting, walking the Harlem streets that were gradually becoming familiar rather than foreign. Coming back to finish what he started. Was that what he was doing? Completing a circle his father had broken? Reconnecting threads that had been deliberately severed? Olivia was waiting for him at a small cafe a few blocks away, having attended the meeting but remained in the background, allowing Maxwell to establish his own relationship with the community. "You were magnificent," she said as he joined her. Honest, humble, genuinely interested in collaboration rather than control. "It felt right," Maxwell replied, the tension he had carried into the meeting now replaced with a sense of purpose and clarity. "For the first time since discovering all this, I feel like I'm moving forward rather than just processing the past." "That's exactly what integration looks like," Olivia nodded. "Allowing new understanding to inform future choices. Creating alignment between who you are and what you do." As they walked together through the early summer evening, Maxwell found himself seeing Harlem through new eyes, not as a neighborhood separate from his life, but as a place that was part of his story, his heritage, his emerging sense of identity. Later that night, in the quiet of Olivia's Brooklyn apartment, Maxwell made a decision that had been forming for weeks. "I want to make my heritage public," he told her, as they sat on her small balcony, the lights of Manhattan visible across the water. "Not with any dramatic announcement, but simply by updating my official biography, by acknowledging it when relevant, by no longer participating in the erasure my father chose." Olivia took his hand, her expression supportive but questioning. "Are you ready for the reactions that might come?" "I think so," Maxwell nodded. "Some will be negative, undoubtedly. Others might be surprisingly positive. But continuing to hide this truth feels increasingly wrong. A betrayal of my grandparents, of the community they served, and ultimately of myself." "It takes courage," Olivia acknowledged. "But I've seen enough of you these past weeks to know you don't lack for that." Maxwell smiled, squeezing her hand. "I have good support." As the night deepened around them, Maxwell felt a growing certainty about the path ahead. It wouldn't be simple or straightforward. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, perhaps even cost to relationships and business interests. But for the first time in his adult life, he was making choices based on values deeper than profit and status, choices that honored the full truth of who he was and where he had come from. The journey back to Harlem had become, unexpectedly, a journey forward into a more authentic life.